Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Welcome to Hammersmith and Fulham Full Council budget meeting. I'm Councillor Patricia Quigley, Mayor of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. I would like to be addressed simply as Mayor. To make the meeting more accessible, we will be supported by British Sign Language interpreters. The meeting has been live streamed to YouTube, and by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. I once again welcome our guests in the audience to this meeting. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, no heckling is allowed, nor any other type of interruption will be tolerated when people are speaking. This is a personal request, as I am hard of hearing, and I need good order to manage the meeting effectively. Councillors, if the whip had not provided me with your name and you wish to speak, please raise your hand and wait until I call you. If you wish to raise a point under standing orders, please raise your hand and I will invite you to speak at a suitable point. When called to speak, please state the standing order you wish to use. Please wait patiently and do not interrupt the person speaking. If you wish to raise a point of order or personal explanation, you may interrupt the councillor speaking. However, please ensure your points are factual, brief and to the point. Please be patient. At the end of each debate or report, I will formally put the recommendations or motion to the vote. For any councillors joining on Zoom, please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. And a reminder that members joining remotely cannot participate or vote on decisions reports. I would also like to remind members that it is customary to stand when speaking if you are able to, so you can be clearly seen and heard. If you are watching at home and would like to follow along with the agenda, there is a link in the description on YouTube. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the meeting calmly by the nearest exit, which include the door on the right and out the main entrance. Officers will direct you to the assembly point on Blacks Road. The meeting will be taken as adjourned until it can safely resume business. Toilet can be found through the door at the back of the room on my right. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Mayor. Apologies for absence have been received from councillors Campbell, Simon, Rosenberg and Morton.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Are the minutes of the last meeting held on the 24th of January 2024 agreed? The anniversary of the war in Ukraine. On Saturday, the 24th of February, marked the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. I invite the leader of the council to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We certainly do live in challenging and difficult times. It is just now 2 years since Vladimir Putin launched a wicked, illegal and unjustified attack on the democratic, free country of Ukraine. Attacks like that happen in Europe very rarely. In fact, one of the great successes of Europe since the end of the Second World War has been of peace and growing prosperity, both thanks to NATO and thanks to the cooperation of the European Union. So for this to happen at this point in this century is symbolic of an end of one part of history and the beginning of another, more dangerous, more challenging, and certainly more violent future. Because as we see, it's not the only war taking place in the world at the moment. Now, you will remember earlier this year that President Zelensky sent a delegation to Hammersmith and Fulham, where we met and talked to members of the Ukrainian government who had come to hear, on the advice of the British government, about the fine work we're doing to be more inclusive to disabled people. There was a bit in the morning, as we were talking and getting to make friends, where one of the government advisors took me aside and said to me that many people in her country, the Ukraine, were now disabled by war, both psychologically, by the trauma of seeing the violence inflicted on them and their families and their cities and their homes, but also physically because of the brutality and wickedness of the Russian attack. So tonight, on this anniversary, we do two things. We send a message to the people of Ukraine from this borough that we have not forgot, but we know full well what you're doing. You are in the front line of a fight for Western liberal values, and it is vital that you win it. It's not just vital that Ukraine wins for Ukraine, it's vital for everybody who holds the notion of liberal and democratic societies dear in their heart. Because if they're not stopped, as we know from history, if dictators are not stopped when they make such an attack, then it takes more of us to stop them in the future. As I look forward to the 21st century rolling out, we need to reaffirm those long-standing values of peace and prosperity, and remember that they have never come about from appeasement or from shirking our responsibilities to face down an aggressor. So tonight, I think we stand as one council and say with one voice that wherever you are, to the Ukrainian people, we are with you. We urge our government to spend more on defense and to continue, in many cases, its strong and positive leadership in defending the Ukrainian government and the values it stands for. Thank you.
The Leader of the Opposition would like to speak, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with what Councillor Cowan has just said. It's a stark reminder to us that every year at Budget Council is the anniversary of the start of the Russian war against Ukraine. 2 years ago, we congratulated the government on its swift declaration of support for Ukraine after Putin declared war on February the 24th, 2022. This support has actively continued with the training of Ukrainian soldiers, generous financial support and weaponry. I would like to thank the residents of our borough who have hosted Ukrainian refugees and the many others who have championed them in their exile by organising school places for their children's, jobs, introductions and monetary and ordinary gifts. We continue to hope and pray that the war will end soon and that Ukraine will emerge again with all its lands intact. Thank you.
Thank you. It's with great sadness that I inform the Council of the death of Peter Zigori on the 2nd of February 2024. He was a councillor from 1971 to 1986. During that time, he also served as chair of the Planning Committee and chair of the Leisure and Recreation Committee. I've been informed that Councillor Cowan and Fowler would like to say a few words. Leader.
Thank you. I would like to send on behalf of everyone in Hammersmith and Fulham profound thanks to Peter Zigori for his service to the people of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, which he did with hard work and dedication between 1971 and 1986. All of us who have been elected to public office will recognise the humbling moment when you arrive at account and you see pencil marks marked next to your name. And it doesn't matter who made those pencil marks. They could be rich, they could be poor, they could be young, they could be old. The diversity of our democracy is such that it is united round a pencil mark. So when you are sent into office, it is indeed a moment that we all should celebrate. But that's the bit where it starts. It's the long committee meetings, it's listening to residents, it's carrying out regular surgeries, and it's working hard for all your residents, no matter who they voted for. Peter did that with distinction throughout his time serving the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. And he did it in the quiet way that many people do on the committees he served on. I would just like to talk about the challenge of being on the planning committee. Peter saw a time when he began to serve where land values radically changed in Hammersmith and Fulham. And throughout that time, he pushed for affordable housing, something that meant thousands of people now live in homes who wouldn't have been able to afford in a place with the third highest land values in Britain. So we send our profound thanks to Peter's family. We recognise that they will be, like us, proud of his work, and we thank him wholeheartedly for being a member of this council at that critical point in our borough's history. Thank you, Peter.
Councillor Carmel, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to say a very few words. I only met Councillor Gregori, I think, on one occasion, and I don't think we exchanged more than a word of good evening to each other. But for the record, he was elected in the Labour landslide of 1971 in the St Stephen's ward, and again in 1974, before the ward names changed to College Park and Old Oak, which he represented up until 1982. Councillor Cowan, the leader of the council, mentioned his time on the Planning Applications Committee. And I think it would be right to recognise that being chair of that committee in those times was a significantly more onerous task than it is today, because back in those days, there were no delegated officer decisions. Members of the council may not realise that probably 97, 98% of all planning applications that come into the council nowadays are decisions based on planning policy that are delegated to our dedicated planning team. But back in the 70s, every single planning application, and the leader referred to the fact of the explosion of applications in the 70s when Fulham became a chic place to live. And literally they used to decide, 400 planning applications in an evening. And I think it's only fair to say that it was not unknown for the planning committee to meet at a pub to decide their decisions as opposed to the town hall. But I'm assured that only soft drinks were consumed during the discussion of the 400 odd items on the agenda. But he served with distinction, he served his community, and we as an opposition are grateful for his service. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to also send my deepest condolences to Peter's family and friends. Can we now stand for a minute of silence in his memory? Right. I'd like to thank, it's public questions. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to submit questions to tonight's meeting. Public questions time is limited to 20 minutes. If a question does not receive a reply in the meeting, a written response will be sent and published in the minutes. For ease of reference, I have provided a copy of your question for you. All the questionnaires called will have an opportunity to ask a brief follow-up question, and please show respect to those asking and answering questions. I will not allow any interruptions or heckling. I invite Nicola Dryden to ask a question to Councillor Rebecca Harvey, Cabinet Member for Social Inclusion and Community Safety.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors. There seems to be an increasing problem with dog poo bags being dropped and littering the pavements. Therefore, I would like to understand what the council is doing to enforce fines on those who are dropping the litter. Is the council planning to have more dog poo bins across the borough in order to try to address the problem? Thank you.
I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
So we know that our residents are concerned about dog fouling, as many reported to us for cleaning and investigation. In response to this, in June 2023, Council introduced a dog control public space protection order, which brought in a range of measures to help us more effectively regulate dog fouling and the behaviour of dogs in open spaces. Our PSPO prohibits dog fouling anywhere in the borough, and any owner not clearing up after the dog can receive a fixed penalty notice. They can also be fined for not possessing the means to clean up after the dog or for not putting their dog on a lead when instructed to do so by an authorised officer of the council. There's more information about the dog control PSPO on our website. Hammersmith and Fulham is unique in having a team of 72 law enforcement officers to enforce the provisions of the dog control PSPO. These officers are tasked to patrol all of the borough, including our parks and open spaces, to identify a wide range of environmental offences, including littering, which the depositing of dog feces on the pavement would be classed as. If any of our officers witness anyone dropping bags of dog feces on the pavement, they would issue a fixed penalty notice for littering. In 2023, our officers issued a total of 1,986 fixed penalty notices, and 1,478 of those were for littering offences. Where dog fouling occurs frequently, we urge all residents to assist us by letting us know where the issue is occurring, what times, and a description of the owner and the dog. This will aid us in coordinating our patrols to deter such behaviour. Any public litter bin in Hammersmith Fulham can be used to dispose of dog waste, and Hammersmith Fulham has a total of 1,415 bins across the borough. If you feel there is a need for an additional bin in a particular location, you can let our street environment services know, and then we can look at providing those bins.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a short follow-up question?
I do, because whilst you say that you've got all these enforcement officers, I've never really met any of them or seen them around the borough. So what hours do they work, and where are they? Where do they put their efforts?
I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
Our Lex officers are on a rota, and they are patrolling the borough 24/7, so they're out every day. They do a patrol across the whole borough, so you might not see them, but they are out there, and they are taking action against residents, and they've conducted a huge amount of litter, stopping people from littering, dealing with fly tipping, dealing with antisocial behaviour. You know, they're patrolling the whole borough and every ward, so there's a team out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I invite Casey Abonari to ask a question to Councillor Rowan Ray, Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform. Please can you read your question? I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name correctly.
We'll get there. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to the councillors in the room and officers supporting them. Decisions taken by adults in the room affect the futures of our young, and we should be doing more to involve them in that process. Can the council commit to writing to 16-year-olds and schools to ensure that they are reminded when they become eligible to vote, to participate in the process? For schools, this would form an active part of their citizenship curriculum.
I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
Thank you very much, Mayor. The council is very keen to ensure that young people learn about and ultimately participate in our democratic process. 16 and 17-year-olds can register to vote ahead of their 18th birthday. However, we know from the Electoral Commission's reports that young people are under-registered across the UK, with just 70% of 18 to 30-year-olds registered to vote, according to the Electoral Commission. We are happy to commit to writing to schools in the borough to invite them to include information about voting and registration in their PHSE classes or any other appropriate lessons. The electoral registration officer already writes to 16 or 17-year-olds to invite them to register to vote. Usually, eligible young people are identified through the annual household canvass process or by checking other council records, including extracts from school rolls where they're available, to identify young people who may be eligible. The council also takes the opinions of our young residents seriously, and we have a very successful youth council headed up by our youth mayor, which are voted for by young people in the borough. This year, elections are taking place for a youth mayor and a youth parliament member, which has established links between the electoral services team, youth services, and politics and citizenship lead teachers across the borough. The youth mayor and youth parliament elections take place in the borough from the 17th of February to the 18th of March. Electoral services and our communications team are supporting young people from the Youth Council to create materials about voter registration and voting, including traditional advertising and video formats, which will also be distributed to schools and young people's services. When the Care Leavers Hub was opened in October 2023, electoral services were invited by the Children and Young People Services team to attend their independent living skills workshops to promote voter registration. The workshops have been well received and led to several of the young people attending becoming registered voters. Electoral services have also provided the hub with voter registration handout materials. The council also actively supports the Pan-London publicity campaign for Local Democracy Week every October, which encourages all Londoners to register to vote.
Thank you. Do you have a short follow-up question?
I do. To the cabinet members in the room, when you are taking decisions, in the absence of an actual young person within that setting, it is not only easy, but it's most common that their views are overlooked and their presence is underestimated, simply because we do not, for the most part, understand how young people consider things, how they factor things in, and effectively, we don't take within our processes the way that they perform and the way that they understand things. So can the cabinet members look into or advise how they can involve and actively have young people present, whether it is from the members' their respective counterparts in the Youth Council, but how we can actually incorporate them into the actual decision-making process through its working organisms?
I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
Thank you very much. Yeah, like I completely agree. It's incumbent on all politicians to speak to all members of society so that they can make sure that they adequately represent them. And that certainly includes young people who, those under 18 who themselves don't actually have a vote. The Youth Council do sometimes attend Cabinet, and I'm sure that me and all my colleagues in the Cabinet have met them and spoken to them about the issues that matter to them and that matter to the people who vote for them. But I'm very happy to reaffirm a commitment to go out and speak to as many young people as I can to make sure that I'm hearing the issues that matter to them, and I'm acting on those in my role, and I'm sure that my colleagues will as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite Nick Smith to ask a question to Councillor Sharon Holder, Cabinet Member for Public Wealth. Please, can you read your question?
Madam Mayor, councillors, thanks for the opportunity to ask a question. Many streets in SW6, South Fulham in particular, are suffering from a chronic lack of investment in what I would call new infrastructure and amenities, such as paving, lighting, street signage, and street furniture, for example. Indeed, many streets even feature some ancient legacy approaches to paving. Waffle print concrete verges, for example, where concrete was simply poured over the grass verges.
Mr. Smith, sorry. I've just been informed you're not reading the question that you submitted. Could you please read the question you've submitted? It should be in front of you.
I thought I was, apologies.
Thank you.
Many streets in SW6 are suffering from a lack of investment in new infrastructure, paving, lighting and street furniture. Could the council please consider a programme of street improvements in the SW6 area using funds raised from the fines gained from non-residents cutting through our residential streets?
Thank you. I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Smith, thank you for your question. I'm pleased to report back that the Council is in the process of developing a public realm programme for the South Fulham area, which includes proposed street infrastructure improvements in a variety of locations across the Wandsworth Bridge corridor and in the east. Measures under consideration include improved lighting, more greening and tree planting, sustainable drainage systems, and improved pedestrian and cycle pathways. The Council will continue to work hand in hand with residents to create a vision that meets the aspirations of the local community. As part of the Clean Air Neighbourhood project in South Fulham, penalty charge notices surplus is ring-fenced for public realm improvements. This means the overall scheme is cost neutral to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a short follow-up question?
I do, thank you. In light of that, would council please consider a programme of new installation, paving, lighting, etc., across all our residential streets to adapt such infrastructure with the climate crisis in mind, recognising that existing infrastructure, drainage, for example, is not fit for purpose for the anticipated future climate cycles?
I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
Well, in answer to your question, which is quite a technical question, although it doesn't seem like it, I would suggest and would ask you to join in with the colleagues or residents that are meeting already in the South Fulham East area to talk about this with our officers, and I'm sure they'll be happy to give you a response during that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've been informed that the questionnaire for question 4 cannot attend, so we will move to question 5. I invite Andy Knowles to ask a question to Councillor Sharon Holder, Cabinet Member for Public Realm. Please, can you read your question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could the council please confirm if they've had any approach from the Department for Transport as part of the LTN review, and what good news does the council have for them on the popularity and effectiveness of the local schemes?
I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
Ms Knowles, we have not been approached by the Department for Transport with regards to the proposed LTN review. Unlike LTNs, our Clean Air Neighbourhood doesn't block roads with physical closures. All traffic can still reach any street without penalty, but smart camera technology prevents out-of-borough motorists from being from moving around residential side streets and using it as a cut through. This was designed to end the decade-old problem of pollution and congestion in the streets around Wandsworth Bridge Road, and I'm pleased to report that this is what they are doing. As regards to the effectiveness of the scheme, the latest data, which is published in the report for next week's Cabinet meeting, show traffic volumes down, congestion down, and toxic air pollution down in the streets to the west of Wandsworth Bridge Road. The data show that there has been no displacement of traffic to the wider area. As regards the scheme's popularity, door-to-door opinion polling on an online survey conducted by The Opinion, one of Britain's leading market research agencies, shows that residents in the Clean Air Neighbourhood overwhelmingly support the scheme. This underlines what residents have repeatedly told us in their own streets with their street-by-street letters of support, which is that the trial has enhanced the quality of life on their streets and is making South Fulham an even more pleasant place to live.
Thank you. Do you have a short follow-up question, please?
Yes, I do, please. Would the council maybe condemn the one-sided Daily Mail hatchet job they did recently on the Wandsworth Bridge Road, with no real mention at all of all the fantastic new businesses that have opened up there in the last year or so?
So do you have a follow-up? Do you have a response?
I do. I'm not going to go so far as to condemn the Mail, because lots of people do read it. But I will say, however, that thank you for your point of view, because you're absolutely right. There are lots of businesses that have opened up in the Wandsworth Bridge Road, and I'm sure and wish those businesses all the very best for their future. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite David Tarsh to ask a question to Councillor Sharon Holder, Cabinet Member for Public Realm. Mr. Tarsh, we haven't actually got enough time left on the clock. It's going to run out, but I have decided I will allow you to ask the first question, and I will allow the Cabinet Member to respond, but I cannot allow a second follow-up question because we simply don't have time. This is a packed meeting.
Well, thank you at least for that. At the last full council meeting, it was made clear that the survey commissioned from Opinion would be used to decide whether to keep the CAN traffic scheme, which has caused huge social division, harm to local businesses, and which Greg Hand's survey found to be deeply unpopular. The law
requires the council to conduct a consultation if it is to retain the traffic scheme. And the law provides that a consultation is only legitimate when the gunning principles are met. Now, the opinion survey, which you cited earlier, breaks the Market Research Society's code of conduct in several ways. Its purpose was not transparent. Its design and its content were biased, and questions in it were leading. The council has also breached the second provision of the gunning principles, that there is sufficient information for the consultees to give intelligent consideration. Intelligent consideration is impossible when the council deliberately conceals the pivotal role of the survey in keeping the traffic scheme, and when the council refuses to answer repeated, dating back to last June from me, repeated Freedom of Information Act questions asking how much money it has collected in fines and how the air quality has changed on the Wandsworth Bridge Road and the New Kings Road. So will the council now provide full and frank answers to those questions, or will it continue to refuse to do so, in which case intelligent consideration is impossible and its consultation is not legitimate?
I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Tarsh, as promised to residents and businesses, the council commissioned a full and proper consultation on the Clean Air Neighbourhood Trial. This included the survey and opinion polling carried out by Opinion, one of Britain's leading market research agencies. The consultation and engagement goes beyond the guidance set out by the Secretary of State for Transport. Data collected has included air quality monitoring, traffic volumes, polling, surveys, economic spend, footfall numbers, and parking PCNs. This has been published in the report for next week's Cabinet meeting, which will discuss the Clean Air Neighbourhood Trial. Clean Air Neighbourhood PCN data will be published in the annual parking report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carmel, you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Under Standing Order 15E12, I am proposing that Standing Order 12A relating to the time limit of public questions is suspended. In support of this motion, I would like to say that this is in effect a single issue meeting. The opposition will only be speaking on item 6.1. And if you were to extend public questions by 20 minutes, that is only the equivalent of 4 speeches by the opposition, which we could quite easily do. And in the interest of supporting our residents, I humbly beseech this council to extend public questions by 20 minutes, and the opposition will not speak on any item apart from item 6.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel.
Mayor, we will not be supporting that. We've got a full budget meeting with many items. The fact the opposition doesn't really engage in the budget process or read the budget papers or even speak on things as important as a 4-year capital programme is peculiar and bizarre, but it's not a reason to change the agenda, because we've got a packed list of speakers who'd like to speak about our plans for the future of this borough.
Thank you. We'll now put this to the vote. We'll now put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And those not voting? The motion was lost. Thank you. The allocated time hasn't been used up. This is the end of public questions. The question we didn't have time for this evening will receive a written response, which will also be published in the minutes. Thank you. Right, item 6, committee reports. Item 6.1, the revenue budget and the council tax levels 2024-2025. I call upon the leader of the council to move the report and its recommendations.
I formally move.
The agreed convention is that the leader of the council and the leader of the opposition have unlimited time to speak on this report, and up to 3 other speakers from each side can speak for 5 minutes each. The leader will then sum up. I call on the leader of the council to speak.
Today, the financial press reported that more than half of English councils are likely to issue a Section 114 notice within the next 5 years. The Local Government Information Unit found that 9% of councils who they've surveyed said they will declare effective bankruptcy within the forthcoming year. Nearly a third of all councils who were surveyed by the Local Government Information Unit said that in the year ahead, they will cut SEN services. They 11.9% said they will slash children's care services, and 16.2% said they will cut social care. The government, which in many ways has caused these problems, has said that there are 2 solutions for councils who find themselves in this predicament. That is to borrow much more money or to sell off assets. Also today, Mayor, the Financial Times reported that England's town halls are being forced by this government to undertake an unsustainable fire sale of assets. And since 2010, when the Conservative and Liberal Democrat government launched their economically illiterate austerity, 75,000 assets have been sold off across the country to a value of £15 billion. Somerset Council, not a Labour council, Somerset Council has applied for exceptional financial support to meet the forecast budget deficit of £100 million. Imagine operating as a councillor with £100 million deficit and having to go to the government. Kent County Council, when I was first elected, was a flagship Conservative council. But that has explained that with the deepening financial trouble, they've put their 200-year town hall up for sale in the hope that they may sell the family silver in order to pay for the next year and year ahead's budget. The party that ideologically is wedded to a conservative view of a small state, of small government, of government not doing very much indeed, has spent the last 14 years wrecking British local government, not just Labour local government, but of all parties. And if you go to a local government conference, you will speak to Conservative councillors, Liberal Democrat councillors, independent councillors, as well as our own Labour councillors, who are distraught about the effects on their communities. And you see it when you travel around our country. You see roads speckled with potholes. Your car bumps along, realizing that they haven't been done up for 10, maybe 20 years. You see young people with nothing to do. waiting for opportunities. You see schools making do with teachers once again bringing in books to help their kids learn to read and other technical equipment. And you see elderly and disabled people home alone without care, often suffering end-of-life diseases such as dementia, and left. The very epitome of an uncivilized approach is to leave the most vulnerable vulnerable. So tonight, all of us in this chamber should reflect on where we are in Hammersmith and Fulham and what we have before us, because we have put together a budget in the most challenging of circumstances. This council's total net budget expenditure tonight will be £128 million. Now, I remind you that in 2010, it was £164 million. So taking away inflation, even the simplest person with the most basic mathematics will recognize that is significantly lower in actual terms, and in real terms, very much lower indeed. We will confirm that we have accepted the government's modelling, because the government now tells us what to do with its budget in order to meet what it thinks will be our total budget to manage our services. And we will add 2.9% to Hammersmith and Fulham's proportion of council tax, which means Band D will be at £915.37. And we will agree to apply the government's adult social care levy, which is a sidestep from the promise that George Osborne and David Cameron made when they said they would sort out adult social care at the beginning of this government's tenure. And finally, we will freeze charges for all services, many of them used by people who don't just want them, but need them. But most importantly, when we look at this time of austerity and councils going bankrupt, we will spend an exceptional £11 million extra on frontline services. And let me just read out what some of those are. Adult home care, an extra 4.2 million. Homelessness. Now, recently there was a report said there's 175,000 people in London. That is roughly the size of our borough, slightly smaller, but roughly the size, are now officially classed as being homeless. And we will spend an extra, on top of what we're already spending, 1.5 million on homelessness. On SEN transport, and many of us who were here in the dying days of that Conservative administration will remember the reckless, cruel and indifference when the Tri-Borough set about a SEN transport service that left parents distraught and children being screamed at by the people they had hired to drive the mobile vehicles around that would transport them from school to home and back again. And for transition of children in care, that's children with special educational needs and children in care, we have put an extra £600,000 extra on top of everything else that we're already spending. So that means since 2014, when this administration came in with a mission to fix this broken borough, we have increased children's services by £19 million. We have increased investment in adult social care by a staggering £26 million. And in total, we've invested an extra £76 million in new frontline services. Now, I ask you to reflect on that and reflect on the comparison of what is happening around the rest of our country. By any measure, that is a Labour administration doing what it said it would do. It would root out wastefulness, it would modernise services, and it would put the people of our borough first and invest in services they rely on. But then there's council tax. So what has happened to council tax under this administration's leadership? Well, I'll tell you, council tax is 14% lower in real terms than it was when the Conservatives ran this borough. 14% lower in real terms, despite the calamity. I can see confusion on some of the Conservative benches as they struggle to try and understand what real terms is. But that's when you add in inflation and you and you make a real calculation of what the actual budget would be, and our council tax is 14% lower. That gives us the third lowest council tax in Britain. We have cut or frozen council tax 5 out of the 10 years we've been in office, and council tax band D is 43% of what is the national average. Now let's reflect on that for a moment. We're not just getting low council tax, you're also getting many more vital services. Now, how, when I talk to business people who I work very closely with, and I tell them about our drop in income, and I tell them about our efficiency drive, and I tell them about the extra services, they all assume we will have put council tax up by the maximum at every point. They are stunned to see that we have kept it low. And that's because this administration knows how to be ruthlessly financially efficient. But the most important thing about our council tax is we've massively cut it for 42% of all our borough's residents. So now, if you're a foster carer, you don't pay the full amount. Now, if you're a care leaver setting out on life, having been looked after by the borough and our foster carers, you don't pay the full amount of council tax. If you're a student, you don't pay the full amount. And if you are on a low income, you don't pay any council tax. That isn't just ruthless financial efficiency, it's compassion and an understanding for not every one of our fellow citizens has the ability to pay. And this social democratic Labour administration has put kindness at the heart of everything we try to do when we put together a financial budget. Now, in November, at the audit committee, because it's very easy for you to take my word for this, the external auditor summed up, having gone through our accounts and looked at our financial plans. And what he said was Hammersmith and Fulham is one of the best run local authorities in London. I think everyone in this chamber, if they put aside their party political allegiance, should be proud of that. I think all our residents are certainly proud of it, which is why they have given us 3 landslides that have defied political gravity every time we've asked them, do they want us to keep our jobs? So I really would like to thank everyone on the team. I'd like to thank Sharon Lee, our fantastic Chief Executive, Savinda Kelsey, our amazing Director of Finance. I'd like to thank all the senior leadership team who have taken on the discipline of bringing their budgets in on budget, not spending money without due process, and making business cases whenever they seek to make a growth plan. Thank you to everyone in our SLT. And I think all of us should do that. I would also like to thank our amazing cabinet member, our formidable cabinet member for Finance and Reform, Councillor Rowan Ree, and his predecessor, Councillor Max Schmidt. Together as a team, they have given us 10 years of growth, prosperity, and financial efficiency. So thank you, Rowan. Thank you, Max. So how did we do this? Well, in 2014, we had a very simple premise. Many of us had worked in the private sector. Many of us had looked at how modern businesses operate. And we took the view that councils were old-fashioned and often outdated in their practices. And we set about not just ruthless financial efficiency, but modern reform. We wanted to operate, as we told many of our officials, more like Google, we still have some way to go, and less like a council in the way that we crunch data and provide targeted services. And that goes to the very heart of this administration's approach. We have therefore saved a record £133 million in wasteful council spending since 2014. Now think about that for a moment. A Labour administration coming in after 8 years of a Conservative administration that boasted it was value for money and ekes out £133 million. I can tell you, I used to sit and listen as the leader of the opposition to the Conservatives telling me that they were at the cutting edge of efficiency. Well, they can't have been, can they? How could we possibly have saved £133 million without cutting a single service? We'll come on to that. But if I were them, I would be sitting there feeling a great sense of shame for my time in office when I had responsibility for our public finances, as many of the people on those benches did. So in summary, we've had a reduction of 55% in our government grant since we came into office in 2014. We've put council tax up. The government tells us it expects us to put council tax up by the maximum and to always pass on the full amount of social care precept. But we haven't done that. And the reason we haven't done that is we made a promise to our residents. Our residents care about many different things. If you meet and go out, as I do, people stop you. Someone just stopped me just outside as I was walking in to tell me that they thought we were doing a good job. I didn't know the person, but they recognized me as the leader of the council. But each and every time I meet people, no matter what background they come from, they tell us very similar things. Our residents care about value for money services. They care about compassion. And that has manifested itself in many different ways, whether they've taken in refugees or whether they volunteer in food banks and help in homeless shelters. They care about a plan to build the future. They care about improving their environment, cleaning their toxic air, improving the public realm, and investing to make this an even better place to live. They care about affordable homes. There is a huge housing crisis, the worst in post-war British history. And they know that it doesn't just affect the poorest, the homeless people we talked about, but it affects their children and it affects their friends and family as they struggle to find a way of a secure place to live whilst they go about their work and lives. They care about the environment and climate change, and they care about growing the economy and new opportunities. They care about keeping them safe, and they care about us acting beyond our remit sometimes to do precisely that. So their values are our values, and that's what's written in the budget in front of everyone tonight. You will see new investment for family hubs, which are being opened up around the country, which was opened by my colleague, Councillor Sanderson, I think it was yesterday, and indeed with the Mayor, yourself, as you will recall. One of the biggest crimes committed by David Cameron and Nick Clegg was to close Sure Start centres. Sure Start centres are an investment into the youngest children. It's an investment to give them the behaviours, to give them the confidence, to give them the skills to shape a different type of future. Cutting it 14 years ago meant today there are 14-year-olds who did not have that investment. How would it be in another 14 years for those people? Or 14 years after that? Let me say something. Investing in our young people is a silver bullet. If we really want to change society, if we want to build the ever better society, strengthening it in all its ways, showing that people believe in democracy, reaffirming their civic duty, but giving them skills to cope with an ever-changing world, then invest in young people. They're not young very long. By 25 years, we can change society. So this investment in family hubs, as you see as a line on a piece of paper, is more than that. It's a philosophy that is counter to the philosophy that saw the Conservatives and Liberals cancel Sure Start. It's a philosophy that each person has the chance to live the best possible life, and it is all our responsibility in our community to put that investment in so every child can do that. I'm very proud, Councillor Sanderson, for leading on this project and radically shifting the barriers when other councils around the country are struggling to maintain the most basic services. Our youth zone, £123 million investment, a state-of-the-art youth centre in White City, next to the Innovation District, linked to the jobs and opportunities in the Innovation District. And it's brilliant. If you go there, it looks what young people deserve. Every kid finishing school has a chance to go to the youth zone. They will have that chance and to learn value-added skills that will set them up for jobs in the 21st century. That is what this administration is about. And that's why the investments detailed in this paper are more than just numbers on a page. Crime fighting. Now, we had a strange debate about this last time, where we heard from the opposition they want us to cut funding for the law enforcement team. And they made some, quite frankly, ridiculous and naive points about the law enforcement team and failed to see how it is part of a four-pronged strategy that is crucial to cracking down on crime. Well, let me tell you this. Our law enforcement team has been essential to 500 Met and Crown Prosecution Service convictions. Not prosecutions, convictions. Because they are the eyes and ears of our community. But they don't just work alone. They work with a state-of-the-art gangs unit. It has analysts. It has psychotherapists. It has prosecutorial specialists. And it infiltrates gangs and it breaks them down. If you're a 10-year-old kid who's been press-ganged into a gang, your life is the closest thing we're going to see to hell anywhere. But it's happening all over our society. We said, as an administration, we're not prepared to let that continue. And we set up the most groundbreaking gangs unit in Britain. And it's protecting lots of people, getting kids out of gangs who've been press-ganged into gangs, stopping hard-nosed crime, tackling county lands. When, within the first 3 months, we set up the gangs unit, it was intrinsic to having over 600 gang members arrested. But guess what? They weren't all in Hammersmith and Fulham. They all weren't in London. They were across the United Kingdom. Now, what that tells you is that crime, the worst type of drug crime and gang crime, is better organized, more technological, more sophisticated than it's ever been before. How does a small West London council set up a gangs unit that has such a national effect? Well, I know the answer to it. I've been asked it at convention after convention as I've been invited to speak about the successes of that. And combined as a third part of our crime fighting initiative is Britain's densest CCTV network anywhere per square kilometre. That's not easy to do that. We've put 4.5 million into the CCTV network over the last few years. We put £1 million into the gangs unit. We put £5 million into the law enforcement team. We are tough on crime. And we are tough on crime because crime is a leveler. It's a democratic process. Anyone can suffer crime. Anyone can get blighted by the injuries of crime and suffer from the worries and mental distraught of it long after it's gone. And we as administration say that no one should suffer crime. And despite having a government and an opposition that is soft on crime and is ready to rip up much of a strategy that's winning national plaudits, we will pursue all measures to stand against crime and face down criminals and keep the residents of our borough safe. Now, I don't think any of us for a moment should take anything for granted, given what's happening nationally to the council budget. So it should be a positive thing that everyone in this chamber should celebrate, that this borough will once again pay for free breakfast for all primary school children in our borough. Yeah. Other councils cutting services. This is a non-statutory services we added. Free breakfast. But not just that. Think about the children who don't get to feed when term time ends. Talk to the teachers who will tell you about children with aching bellies, shamed into asking for food, but often knowing they're not going to get it out of term time. This borough, 3 meals for children outside of school term time. That's an extra service. It's not statutory. We do it because we're Hammersmith and Fulham Labour. And it's something now picked up by the mayor, and I understand being looked at seriously by the opposition front bench. Support for food banks, support for legal advice, support for across the third sector. If any of us were in a position to have to go to a food bank, and if you meet people who do, you can see the anguish on their faces that they find themselves there. Many people who are going to food bank are now tied into this Conservative government's system of benefits. You get a docket and you're sent to the food bank to get your allocated food. It has become part of the Conservatives' welfare state. And when you meet people working, sometimes as carers, sometimes as nurses, but in frontline jobs, and you hear their story, you hear their throats buckle with embarrassment when they say, I never expected to be here. That's why we have given record amounts of money to the food banks, but also to advice services. We pay for advice specialists to be in the food banks to make sure people get the benefits that they're due. And we help people struggling to buy school clothes and other essential health products. Now, what could possibly have happened that we end up a council having to do that? How could that be the case? That the capital city, the 5th richest country on earth, is having to come up with services like this. We heard some of the questions, the good questions from members of the public tonight. People want the streets clean. We have the cleanest streets we've had in the borough's history, according to independent reports. They want improved public realm as people move from going into work every day to spending more time at home in their communities. These are the things that make London and Britain and Hammersmith and Fulham a better place to live. But we're putting resources because our society has been broken. Homelessness up, food poverty up, child poverty up, people left alone in their homes to end-of-life diseases in increasing numbers. How could that happen in such a country as great as Britain has always been? How could this vandalism have happened to what was the United Kingdom of Great Britain that was for everybody who lived in our country? Well, it happened because the Conservative philosophy is flawed. They literally believe in the small state. They literally talk about tax cuts as the only part of government, whereas for us, it is a part of a wide suite of good government that provides excellent services. They literally talk about value for money without knowing the value of an individual human life, whether it's a small child starting out in life but not born into the best of circumstances, or whether it's an elderly person who didn't make the wealth that maybe they would have hoped to and are relying on government services to see their end of days as good days. There is something wrong with our country, and after 14 years of Conservative government, there is only one group of people to blame. Now, you're going to hear from the Conservatives that they cut council tax and that they even had on their messaging the low tax borough. So it should be a point of embarrassment for them that our council tax is 14% lower in real terms than when they left office. But let me tell you something. They never once cut council tax of their own volition. Not once. When they got into office, they had Gordon Brown as Chancellor and Tony Blair as Prime Minister. A government that made Britain significantly stronger in its brief tenure, but it funded local government in a way that we have never, ever had in our time in office. But secondly, they had Eric Pickles' council tax freeze grant. It literally paid councils to freeze or cut council tax. It said, if you do that, we will pay you the total amount of money for that cut. No wonder we inherited so much wastefulness that we were able to cut. No wonder. It's a bit like when a kid buys his mum a present for Mother's Day, but got the money from his dad, or maybe vice versa. You can't take credit if you haven't earned it yourself. That lot never earned it. And some of them were there at the time, voting through every single bad decision that Conservative administration. But not once, never let them say they cut council tax, not once did they cut it. Their dad cut it in the form of Eric Pickles. So, let me just make some propositions to you. You can't trust the Conservatives with public services. Now, I know you're going to think I would say this. I'm the leader of the Labour Party in this borough, the leader of its administration. But I think the public are saying that. Yeah, I think the public are saying that. You can't trust them with public services. You can't trust the Conservatives on council tax. Yeah, they've gone bankrupt all around the country and they never cut it in Hammersmith and Fulham. They waited for someone else to help them. You can't trust the Conservatives on crime. They give mealy-mouthed speeches about and have photographs taken with the Let team saying how much they support them, and then they stand up and say we'd cut the budget. If we had more money, we'd put it in the law enforcement team. Ignorance is no substitute for knowing what to do when it comes to tackling crime. And that's the best example, the best conclusion you can reach is that they simply don't know what they're doing on crime. You can't trust the Conservatives on housing. They sold 2 estates and they took on a legal responsibility for us to buy out every leaseholder and freeholder that would have bankrupted the council. How the hell they did that should be a public inquiry. But not just did they do that, they went and visited people in their homes and they looked down their nose at the council tenants and they told them that they thought it'd be better to demolish their homes and replace it with market housing. Sally Taylor was distraught by those 10 years, what happened to her. If we hadn't won control of the council in 2014, they would have sold even more, incompetently, but they would have sold even more. And they signed a contract with us, with a company that was deliberately underfunded, that did not do any planned maintenance. And then they have the temerity to complain now and say they care about council housing. Well, let me tell you something. Every single council resident in Hammersmith and Fulham knows that these people look down on the nose on them and they tried to sell their homes from underneath them. And the fact that we're here and the fact that we're fixing the problem and putting record investment into council housing is a sign that not only can you not trust the Conservatives with council housing, you can't trust the Conservatives with housing. You simply cannot trust the Conservatives. Now, every single point, the MP for Chelsea and Fulham has backed every single decision that administration made. And when this Labour administration came into office and tried to overturn the Capco deal, I was stunned to see that Greg Hands was visiting Capco. I don't know if he had lunch, but I know many of the front bench did take lunch from Capco. And the next day put out a statement when we were trying to renegotiate to get Sally Taylor's home back, saying how much he supported the demolition of the estates and the replacement with just 11% affordable housing and that mad scheme. So you're going to hear words from these people, but deeds speak more loudly than words. And this government has wrecked Britain, but the hothouse, the test house for selling off public assets, slashing services, and pretending to cut tax by putting them up, was here in Hammersmith and Fulham, Cameron's favourite council, as it used to be known. So when we go to the next election, in just 2 years' time, we'll be reminding people of the Conservative record, and we'll be setting out an agenda of hope and optimism. We'll hopefully have a national government and a new MP for Chelsea and Fulham who cares about the people of Chelsea and Fulham, and we will hopefully have a very different plan for our country. But when we do it, let's always remember that the choice is stark in this borough. Choice between a Conservative Party that doesn't like quite a lot of the people who live in Hammersmith and Fulham, and a Labour Party that stands for all the people and works to make our borough safer, stronger and kinder with every action it takes. I commend this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I'll call on the Leader of the Opposition, Councillor Victoria Brockabont, to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, another year on, but we've just listened to the same old misguided and at times equivocal interpretation of the administration's political achievements. Officers have, of course, worked hard, as we acknowledge and expect, but it is the political direction, priorities of your administration and management of residents' monies which are of concern to us and many residents. This year, GB's economy has started to recover from COVID and the sudden rise in oil and gas prices caused by the Russian war against Ukraine. To support people through these crises costs the country at least £500 billion. However, it was the morally right action to take and the government took it. This year has brought new concerns financially with the attacks on tankers in the Red Sea, and the implications of this are still unclear. The good news, though, is that by sticking to their economic plans and making the right long-term decisions, the government has now reduced inflation by well over half, down to 4%. However, at the end of last year, we entered a mild technical recession with a 0.3% contraction in the fourth quarter after 0.1% in the third quarter. But this recession is, as is widely acknowledged by independent forecasters, such as Capital Economics, not fitting the typical model. The labour market remains very tight, with 900,000 job vacancies alongside wages that continue to comfortably outpace inflation. It's possible that we are exiting the recession just as we have had it confirmed, or perhaps we are in a situation as in 2012, when the initial estimates of GDP growth were revised upwards from -0.5 to +1%. Other independent forecasters, such as those from the Centre for Economics and Business Research, have said that this technical recession may well not last longer than the 2 quarters, and in fact may well have finished already. We'll have to wait and see, but retail sales in January were up 3.4%, which is a positive. And the PMI index was up for the 4th consecutive month at 53.3%. Interest rates are also predicted to fall over 2024, which will further stimulate growth. But now on to the council budget. Michael Gove, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, has confirmed that councils will be given an above-inflation increase of 7.5% in cash terms, which includes the extra 600 million promised last month. DLUHC also stated that it was supporting all councils through the sector-wide funding guarantee. This ensures that all councils will see an increase in core spending power of at least 4% before any local choices on council tax. This is an increase from the 3% announced at the provisional settlement. This was a challenging but more generous settlement than councils were expecting. And this leads me to this point, that despite your denials, the Local Government Finance Policy Statement 24-25 makes clear, and I quote, "The council tax referendum provisions are not a cap, nor do they force councils to set taxes at the threshold level. So if you really wanted to help residents with the recent cost of living increase, you could make this one of your priorities, but you haven't." The government passed this legislation to cap rises to a 2.99% increase, plus the adult social care precept of 2%, without triggering a referendum, in order to stop profligate, mainly Labour and Lib Dem councils flagrantly raising council tax, as you did in LBHF, for example, under a Labour government in 2003-04, up a whopping 9.8%. Meanwhile, choosing to cut or freeze council tax, such as Wandsworth Council have done, a position possible because they're still riding on the back of the previous Conservative administration's strong finances, is a choice you could have made. And 25% of all the UK's councils have chosen to do this in 24-25. You may well argue that around half of the overall year-on-year increase in the government's core spending power for 24-25 comes from an assumption that councils will increase council tax by the authorised limit of 4.99%. But it seems rather absurd to have to argue that you would obviously have less income to spend. Councils are responsible for their own finances, and increases below 2.99% are a choice you can make, but haven't. So, rather weakening your well-publicised assertion of helping residents with the cost of living. And while I'm talking about the cost of living, the support which you have made available to residents since 2021 is never acknowledged as being funded by the government, not by your own good housekeeping. So thank you to the government for 2.8 million in 23-24. You have form with election years, however, as we know, and ironically, you seem able to cut council tax while choosing to ignore the 2% increase modelled by the government in 22-23 and not applying the ASC precept of 1%. Instead, you use council savings and income to fund growth. For 24-25, as has happened previously, the government has also provided you with stability in other grants, for example, by continuing to increase the revenue support grant in line with CPI. I find it concerning, and residents will wonder in a raising of the eyes type manner, why in the January 24 MTFS you proudly state that you've cut or frozen council tax 5 times in the last 9 years, as in fact, including 24-25, it's gone up 5 times as well. And so that's a 50-50 chance for residents, whereas we did cut council tax by 3% for 7 years out of 8, and in 1 year froze it. Next, you claim that your council tax support scheme provides discounts to 42% of residents. Obviously, you are well aware of the benefits of spinning headline numbers. But the truth is that the council tax legislation itself provides for many of these discounts: single people, students, and severely mentally impaired people, and so on. You have chosen to add in-house foster carers and special guardians, a policy with which we agree, and care leavers up to 25 years old, though the age limit is seldom mentioned, but we agree. The numbers are very small, however, and do not warrant the self-congratulatory slogan, "We are such a compassionate council." I also want to state, as was acknowledged by yourselves for the first time last year, that we initiated the council tax support scheme in our borough. Just in case it was missed, there is good news on business rates income too. Even though the government has frozen the small business rate multiplier for the 4th year in a row and the 75% retail, hospitality and leisure relief for 24-25, the council will be compensated by the government for any loss of income, meaning you receive £62.509 million in total in 24-25. Now, the problem that you've created is that you are so unhelpful towards our small businesses through parking charges and unwelcome road funnelling for non-residents, like the South Fulham can, that council finances could be badly affected if the government's support were to change. But more on that later. Much is always made by you, and this year is no exception to the fact that monies available to you have been cut. You use figures from 2010 to illustrate your point, and try and back up your ruthlessly financial efficient tagline. Your administration, as you well know, started in May 2014, and using this date lowers the percentage of economies which you've been forced to make by the government. In fact, for 2021-2 and 2022-3, you had underspends on the general fund revenue budget. The government needed to tackle the inefficiencies and woeful reckless spending of councils. As you well know, councils are required by law to have a balanced budget each financial year, and let's not forget, provide best value to residents. Michael Gove commented on wasteful expenditure, and I quote, "I encourage local authorities to consider whether expenditure on discredited equality, diversity and inclusion programmes meets this objective." Nevertheless, despite your whining, you have produced a balanced budget, yet again, by not spending a cumulative 48 million. Of concern, though, is the balancing this year depends on savings of 8.1 million, which is the equivalent of 4.2% of net budget. This begs the question, how robust are your savings? There are many caveats in the very long list of over 20 risks and challenges. 2024-5 is balanced, but only after a one-off interest receivable of 5 million, interest earned because of our high reserves legacy. There is also another 4.26 million, which looks like a one-off release from reserves. These may well be a legitimate use of monies, but they are large one-offs and account for £1 in every 20 to be spent next year. You have balanced this year and next as required by law, but by 27-28, you are £38.16 million adrift, over half of this from 25-26. You are following a hoping for something to turn up approach. Do you think if there were to be a Labour government that it would be more generous? We all know that historically Labour spends, which is one of the many reasons why you can't trust Labour with the economy. You are definitely looking at subsidising your operation by use of non-earmarked reserves, which are relatively high.
Councillor Bokbava, I need to stop you for a minute, please. Please, no heckling.
Thank you, Mayor. For example, corporate demands and pressures supply 8.2 million alone in 2024-25, but you can only use this once and could only do this for another 3 years before it's exhausted. Other service reserves and other corporate reserves are also expected to come up with 6.1 million next year, which would be exhausted in the next couple of years. Basically, if you incur, say, approximately 9 million overspend next year, then you will struggle. Plus, this money from reserves needs to be replenished, but from where? Or else the budgets themselves need to be brought in line by large amounts. Is this coming from the parking budget, which I've not been allowed to see, perhaps? Earmarked reserves are also being used at a very rapid rate. You may well argue that this is what they're there for, but in 2023, they stood at £98.3 million. For 24-5, down 26.3 million to 72 million, and projected for 25-26 to be down 10 million to 62 million. Again, this is money that can only be spent once. I'm glad that you've remembered to put in place a reserve strategy. It would be shocking if you hadn't. Our total general fund reserves and non-schools earmarked general reserves fund is 127.8 million, whereas the London Borough average is 142.5 million. So 14 other boroughs are doing better than us. And this expressed as a percentage of gross service revenue expenditure gives us 21.33% compared to the 59% average. So not doing well enough, a B-, I think. Now, how robust are your departmental savings? Well, we don't know, do we? As savings indicated at Budget Council are changed throughout the year without scrutiny. For 24-25, you have identified an extra 8.28 million, making a potential 12.3. The concern is, do you have the ability to gear up and the political realism to find savings of that size? You complain constantly at how difficult it all is, and you have never made that level of savings before. 2021-2 savings were only 6.9 million, and there was only 4.9 million in 22-3. As the council's auditor said in its interim report, there is therefore risk surrounding whether the council will be able to scale up the ability to deliver savings of 29 million, for example, when this would be almost quadruple what the council has delivered since 21-22. The auditors continued, and I quote, "The council cannot afford to become complacent with regard to its financial management." Another point is that you're factoring in big savings in the senior organisational structure of 1 million in year 2. So, wow, several big posts must be for the chop. It's also concerning that you spend more than twice the local authority average on agency staff, over 17.5 million, which is over 13% of annual staffing costs, when the local authority average is just 6%. This leads me to the recent SIPFA FM code review. This code sets out standards of financial management for local authorities. Now, of the 7 principles by which our council is graded using the traffic light system, only 3 are green and 4 are amber. As this is a report on financial management, I think the ruthlessly financial efficient tagline has to go B- and must do so much better. Now, I would like to mention the other part of the council tax bill, the mayoral precept. Obviously, you have no say in this consistently rising charge, but he is a socialist like you, and therefore you refuse to condemn him for raising the mayoral precept by 8.6% this year. This is on top of last year's staggering increase of 9.7%. This makes a total rise since he started his mayoralty of 70.8%. Unbelievable, 70.8%. Obviously, he has no regard for the cost of living rise for Londoners and deserves to be well and truly beaten in the election on May the 2nd by Conservative candidate Susan Hall. Councillor Adrian Pascu-Tilbury will speak more on this later in the evening. I'm now going to move on to development and affordable housing starts. This is crucially important for our residents and our borough. It's extraordinary and disingenuous that you talk so highly of your concern in this area, but the figures show differently. The latest figures available are from April to September 2023. So let's start with completions of affordable housing. Across London, 3,505 units were built, but LBHF only completed 40 homes, which is 1.14% of total completions. Included within the total of affordable housing was housing for social rent. 1,418 units were built across London, but, and wait for it, 0. Yes, 0 homes for social rent in LBHF. Now, for starts on site, between the same dates, we have 142 new homes across London, but only 5 in LBHF. 5. And 0 were for social rent. No wonder your backbenchers look shocked, and our residents will be too. You boast that you do not meet with developers, so why should they build in our borough? Is it possible that your sneering attitude towards developers making a profit springs from your inherent dislike of capitalism? Whichever way you spin it, you need the Section 106 and civil payments to balance the budget. I just hope that, unlike the Parliamentary Labour Party, you're not spending the VAT increase on school fees plan many times over before you actually get it. Receipts from CIL and Section 106 for 23-24 were 21.1 million for the former and 9.1 million for the latter. As I've said previously, the use of these monies seems to be being stretched to cover spending which would regularly be expected of the council, and any downturn in receipts would be catastrophic, particularly to the Environment Department, the Let and Gangs Unit, and the Civic Campus. Planning fees and charges have been raised by the government from December the 6th last year, so this should help reduce the general fund contribution to costs, although applications, major, minor and other, are on a downward trend. The Council Building Control Service is still struggling to pull its weight financially. They need to up their game in a competitive market. Why isn't the Council Service the #1 go-to? And now we have gimmicks too, the new green bond. Let's not worry about the housing ombudsman, the non-working bridge, the lack of growth. Let's encourage residents to invest with us at less than they can earn in a bank account. You may call it the UK's biggest ever green community investment scheme, but we know what it is in plain English, and it's called passing round the begging bowl. Moving on, Councillor Johnny Orford will be speaking on the housing budgets later, but I'd like to say that the embarrassment to our borough of having the Ombudsman's damning report and subsequent follow-up investigation is a severe blot on your copybook. Claims lawyers and the press are highlighting your failures to repair damp and mould in an appropriate time frame, and the subsequent skyrocketing costs of compensation are hitting the HRA. This, of course, is a severe financial loss to the council, but how do you measure how tenants have suffered? The most upsetting casework we have is related to disrepair and tenants in fear for their own health and safety in our council homes. It's truly shocking. The housing department is seemingly content in its 10-year plan to have voids running at 2%, with the subsequent void rent loss at £2 million. And this is when people are clamouring for homes. The HRA General Reserves is now only 5 million, down half from 22-23. And the borough's auditors have said that the financial stability of the HRA is in question, and that, and I quote, the council has failed to deliver a minimum core standard of service. A minimum core standard of service. What a shameful indictment. Tenants have been in fear of random rent increases after 2 in election year 2022. A small one of 1.5% first before the election, followed by a larger increase of 4.1% after. All very questionable. This year it's 7.7%, claiming to be a compassionate council in your value statements is clearly absurd. Now I'd like to focus on the importance of growth in LBHF. This is often mentioned by the administration, and the administration likes to claim all the credit with its industrial strategy. The start of all this was, however, Stephen, now Lord Greenhalgh's idea with Imperial. And as it so happens, I have the figures for gross value-added growth balanced at current basic prices to hand, and the figures make interesting reading. Between 2006 and 2013, 8 years, the London growth rate trend fell after London's real financial crisis of 2008 to 30.3%. But LBHF outperformed London by growing 16.5% more to 46.8%. Meanwhile, during your first 8 years of administration, London overall grew by 25.8%, and LBHF grew only marginally more, up 6.1%. Much of that 6.1% was from our legacy projects too. So despite your good intentions for our borough, our plans were better. And I would argue that your value statement tagline of building shared prosperity is rather preposterous in this context. Could do better, a B- perhaps. Now I will move on briefly to the adult social care budget, as Councillor Lloyd Harris will speak about this in more depth later. Residents will see from their council tax bills that you are claiming the right, as per the government's policy, to add the social care precept of 2% for 24-25. What concerns us is that out of very misguided ideology, you steadfastly refuse to accept, on behalf of our residents, the government funding in 6 out of the last 9 years. How extraordinarily high-handed of you to put your political views ahead of our residents' needs. I believe you have a lot of explaining to residents on this decision. At this point, I'd like to mention the Town Hall redevelopment project. In your manifesto, you proudly state that you will open the Civic Campus by Christmas 2023. Well, here we are in the Irish Cultural Centre Theatre, and very pleasant it is too. So thank you very much to the Irish Cultural Centre Board for coming to our rescue and being so welcoming. The fact remains, however, that you have had to exclude some of your councillors due to space. Do you draw lots, or are councillors lining up to stay away? It's all rather shambolic. You must be embarrassed. The delay in moving back to the town hall is costing millions. In your manifesto, you rather boldly stated that the scheme would break even, but that's very unlikely now. As an example, in the reserves, a risk of almost 1 million is highlighted because of the profit share agreement you have made. Residents are right to worry as you juggle with our finances. Perhaps a point to note is that the total scheme is budgeted to cost 57 million, 22.8 million from SIL contributions, but 1.1 million has not yet been received. Another point is it the right time to be acquiring commercial units for the borough, all £29 million worth, particularly as you've made King Street such a dangerous road for pedestrians to cross? Also, the final design elevation frontage to King Street is skew width. Why? You had a great chance to build something memorable and even messed that up. What a shame. There's obviously no hope of moving back in this year as meetings have all been scheduled elsewhere. Is there hope for 2025? Who knows? Meanwhile, for officers, this is more than irritating, and the council should take heed of the government's statement that this situation is no excuse to establish a 4-day working week, as it does not represent good value for taxpayers' money. At this point, as I only have the one chance to speak to this motion, I would like to answer the inevitable repetitive criticisms that are thrown at us, so get ready to tear up your speeches. First of all, I make reference in my budget response speech to your 2022 manifesto because it is current and relevant. Be assured that we had a fully costed manifesto ready if we had won in 2022. The fact that you haven't seen it is irrelevant. We actually saw in 2014, when you narrowly and unexpectedly won your initial manifesto, just 3/4 of one A4 page, if I'm being generous. You weren't prepared then, and you are not that much better prepared now. Secondly, I mention your spin and economical truths, often with smaller yet important examples, because they are indicative of your management style. You did similarly in your budget response in 2013, so quid pro quo then. And finally, I'm flattered about your interest in how I run the opposition. It's an active opposition because we are passionate about our borough. I decide which of my councillors attend meetings. It's quite frankly nothing to do with you, who I put up or when. It shows how nervous you are that you frequently demand to know. It's my job to keep you on your toes. Now, on to the environment budget. As I said last year, the splitting of budgets between scrutiny committees was done, I presume, to make it more difficult for us to scrutinise. But nevertheless, as usual, you are cutting the environment budget this year by 1.55 million. Meanwhile, you're also investing 488,000. Fees and charges in total generate 78.4 million, and you are using the standard uplift of 6.7% for 24-25. There are, however, some notable exceptions with sky-high increases which serve to highlight your real political beliefs. I'm going to list a few examples which show what I mean. Let's start with hammering businesses. Charges for waste collection up 10%, hiring a bin, particularly your unfavoured 660-litre bin, is up 46%. Then, so much for encouraging new buildings. You're raising the charges by 100% for new street names, building names and addresses. Licenses for both major and minor crane operations are also up 100%. Try building these days without one. Then we move on to residents. You can't help yourselves, can you? Charging our borough's private schools, which mainly educate children who live in our borough, as less deserving of playing sport, so increasing the hire charges of pitches by them up 19 to 21%. It's so spiteful. Next, your attitude to bulky waste collections. This is a vital service, particularly for those residents without a car, which you really seem to wish we all were, and therefore unable to drive to the dump. Charges are being raised up 50%. 50%. What on earth do you think is going to happen? Well, I'm going to answer that for you. More fly tipping. And yet you still want us to believe that you are aiming for a beautiful public realm. For goodness sake. All in all, you have managed to find another 13 new services for which to charge. But there is one anomaly which needs explaining. Although out of borough people, according to your policies, are obviously not welcome in our borough if they drive or play sport, they are welcome if they are dead, and for some bizarre reason want their ashes scattered in the borough. Charges for non-resident ashes scattering is going down by 38%. And before you bring up our typo on the fees and charges list from 13 years ago, we never were going to charge for children's internment. I am glad you've retained this policy at least. I'm now going to touch on Hammersmith Bridge. It's nearly 5 years since you closed it and you've spent 8,809,000 on the stabilisation and pre-restoration works. Residents are fed up with your delays. The Department for Transport is paying for a third of the costs and the government is giving TfL a further third, ring-fenced, and you're going to charge a toll through a build and repay scheme. At one point you said that LBHF residents would not have to pay a toll. Has the government agreed to this? Residents are just fed up that they can't cross the river for 5 miles, and the clogged roads in our borough are testament to that. You have no sense of urgency regarding reopening the bridge, and consistently blaming the government doesn't reflect well on your administration. You own it. The business plan was not backed by the government a number of times for incompleteness. You're not very professional, are you? Just get the bridge open. Another manifesto promise was to develop the tunnel plans under the Hammersmith gyratory in the Thames, which we began and nothing has happened. So 10 wasted years. Wouldn't it have been useful to have a tunnel given your closure of Hammersmith Bridge? I'm also very concerned regarding the economic impact of the bridge's closure to LBHF, but have been unable to find any figures on this. Doesn't this matter to you? I will now explore your CAN project in South Fulham. This is a policy on which you have still not consulted properly. The latest online opinion consultation was skewed towards clean air questions, not the practicalities of the scheme, for example. The advertising of the consultation was only delivered to 15,000 properties, not to all properties in Fulham, and there was a very short response time to boot. This is just the wrong way to carry out a consultation, and nearly 80% of residents are unhappy with your consultation process, as opinion figures already published in the Cabinet papers for March the 4th show. Many residents who are directly affected were unable to state their opinions. Does this matter to you? The issues with the scheme should have been thought through before being implemented, but they weren't because of your lack of care and blinkered ideological standpoint. And of course, there is also the prospect of you adding in so many exclusions due to residents' protests that the whole scheme is reductio ab absurdum. You don't like Fulham very much, do you? But you're actually frightened of residents in Hammersmith, which is why you've delayed your CAN plans there. Delayed but not buried, as 3.3 million in the parking reserves budget is earmarked for expansion later this year. Meanwhile, in Fulham, Ubers still refuse to drive residents to their door, and more importantly, lone women are frightened walking down empty streets. I, who have always felt comfortable walking even late in the evening through Fulham, find the deserted streets scary. There is comfort in passing traffic, and that's why women stick to main roads, if they can. But eventually one needs to use side streets like Broughton Road, and it's nerve-wracking. You claim you support equality, but not in this case. The South Fulham economy has suffered dreadfully. There are 30 vacant commercial units. There are 30 vacant commercial units on the Wandsworth Bridge Road, which is 39%. This compares with the national average of 14%. Shopkeepers are at their wits' end and have been interviewed by the Daily Mail. I would have thought you'd have noticed that our borough is hitting the national press regularly and not for positive reasons. This is definitely not bringing shared prosperity to our borough, so another of your value statements is trashed. Now, as the Cabinet Member for the Environment in our administration, I received a monthly update list of income from camera fines, penalty charge notices, yellow box junctions and bus lanes, etc. And yet when I've asked for this information, I've been told that it's unavailable till after this meeting, and that the latest figures I can see are 3 years old and from 2020 to 2021 during the pandemic. I think residents should make of that what they want. Also, despite being asked many times, the council has not produced any relevant figures to show that air quality has improved. We keep being promised the information, but it never materialises. Why won't you tell us you are doing things to residents and not with them? Meanwhile, the expansive promise made during the short campaign in 2022 by the Labour Party to allow residents free parking in all zones was watered down in your 2022 manifesto. Only low emission-based cars outside of rush hours and school collection times and parking in areas which are not busy would be free. Well, that about sums it up. A Labour administration which promises the earth and delivers nothing. Next, I'd like to move on to the new giant bins, food waste and garden waste. We are pro-recycling and are horrified that we are still in the bottom quartile for recycling in London. But there are ways to encourage residents which are better than this. When you signed the contract with Veolia, I don't believe you had residents in mind, but pound signs of savings, an ongoing 250,000 a year, you hope. You could be saving pounds more though, as Veolia still seem to be able to pay for 4 men, yes, 4 men, to walk down one side of my road to glance at the front garden space available for bins. Extraordinary, and this happened yesterday. So much for being expert in negotiating contracts. It was yet another tick box exercise which has resulted in a contract unsuitable for most of the borough and clearly not value for money. The bins are enormous, are above windowsill height, don't fit in existing dustbin shelters, which were built with planning permission, and are heavy to move. These are just a few of the complaints from residents who already have them. The borough rollout is going at pace, but the service is not acceptable. Bins are left on the street with open lids to catch the rain and advertise homes as empty to burglars, for example. What is interesting is that you have obviously decided, knowing the caveats of the scheme, and despite being legally allowed to impose your own collection equipment on residents, not to do so. But, and there's always a but with you, you're not going to tell anyone that they can say no. So in order to say no, I still want to use the clear recycling bags and my own dustbins, which were bought to fit my household's needs. Residents will be talked to by council officers. It all sounds rather Stasi-like to me. Doing things to residents, not with them, comes to mind. Furthermore, it's also being rumoured that this change to enormous bins is because you want to stop the weekly collection of rubbish. If this is true, this would be another nail in your coffin. Regarding garden waste, this is going to be a new optional paid-for service to residents. It will cost £65 a year and need 10,000 residents to sign up to make the scheme viable. and that is a lot of qualifying residents. The initial cost to the council is 278,000, but you hope it will return 650,000 worth of savings. Again, I can only hope that you get the numbers you need to sign up, but I have my doubts. I must now mention our beautiful parks and open spaces. You trim and prune their budgets every year. You will run down the manpower needed to a skeletal level, and residents are deeply upset by your lack of investment, despite earning millions from subletting our parks and open spaces to fairs and such like. A few events are okay, but you've gone wildly over the top. You don't clear up advertising banners and they remain out of date for months and even years. The so-called bonfire nights in Ravenscourt and Bishop's Park were a disgrace. For those in your group who don't realise, bonfire night is for fireworks and not a pathetic, barely visible laser show of 20 minutes on repetitious loop 3 times during the evening. The tickets were expensive, the food trucks were expensive, the rides were pathetic and expensive. You don't know your residents, do you? They were very, very disappointed. Next, by stealth, you were cutting library hours. Fulham Library, for example, now shuts at 7 p.m. rather than 8 p.m. This is where students go, particularly in the evening, to study, to improve their lives, and you are stopping them. You obviously have no pride in LBHF facilities. So, to conclude, this is a budget of missed chances, a budget which could have been good, but is merely adequate. A B- for you then. Furthermore, your lack of a positive vision for our borough is deeply upsetting. The complacency, the nanny knows best approach to residents, your arrogant standpoint that your socialist dogmas will eventually wear residents down, the sanctimonious value statements broken with every policy, the hypocrisy that's shown time after time, the audacious consulting methods on important schemes, the smugness visible in your ranks when refusing to extend public question time at council meetings, even when residents are waiting in the room and then laughing at them. But perhaps you are just not interested, too busy applying for GLA and parliamentary seats to care about running for our council. So tonight, it will come as no surprise that we will be voting against your budget. But I'd like to finish this evening with some good news. We do care about our wonderful borough and our fantastic residents, and come 2026, you will realise what and why you've lost. Labour really does let us down.
Thank you. I've received the list of speakers and will take them on an alternate basis, one from the administration, followed from the opposition. I'll call on Alex Sanderson, Councillor Alex Sanderson.
Thank you, Mayor. How to follow that barnstormer, but I'm happy to do so in front of, I believe, the full Labour Council, other than 2 ill-advised absences, but maybe there are so many of us, it's hard to count. We know numbers are not the strong point suit of the opposition. Mayor, as we've heard, despite losing almost 55p in the pound since 2010 in our real term spending powers, I am proud that this administration has fought fiercely to not just protect our services, but has delivered new and better policies and ideas to make sure that our residents, and especially our young people across Hammersmith and Fulham, get to thrive and live the rich, exciting lives that they so deeply deserve. I'd like to talk about just one of our new innovative ways of working that is launching this year, transforming how the council and key services will interact with our communities, our brand new family hubs. Yesterday, alongside the Mayor and almost 200 families, partners and community organisations, I was delighted to open our very first family hub, the first of 3 that we're opening this year across the borough. The development of family hubs is a key manifesto commitment, making it simpler for families to access a wide range of services to ensure they receive the right help at the right time. We're bringing our services out into the heart of our communities so that they're accessible and easy for residents to get to. Mayor, although I'm sure you'll agree with me that we are one of the very best local authorities, we are also one of the smallest. Despite this, we know it can take residents a long time to traverse the length of Hammersmith and Fulham. And when residents are located in the waterfront Riviera of Sands End or the sunny uplands of College Park and Old Oak, the journey to 145 King Street is longer still. Placing family hubs at the centre of our communities means that we are making the lives of our residents easier by bringing council services to the community instead of expecting our community to come to us. Alongside our dedicated specialist hub at the Stephen Wiltshire Centre for Disabled Children and their families, we're also opening a family hub in the north of the borough at Old Oak Community Centre and a second in the south in Fulham at the Tudor Rose Community Centre. Our vision is for every child, every young person, every individual and family to be happy, to be healthy and to have the opportunity to thrive, supported by an effective and compassionate community network. It's part of our work to make Hammersmith and Fulham a family-friendly borough, just as we're doing with our free breakfast offer for primary schools, our incredibly popular holiday clubs and food offer, and our school uniform support for those families who need it. At our hubs, every service from infant feeding and parenting classes through to youth clubs, exercise classes, and stopping smoking support will be based right at the heart of our communities. Our family hubs will house everything from housing advice to health visiting, debt and money advice to domestic abuse support, maternity advice services to mentoring. And although the delivery of family hubs has been led by Children's, this is a whole council reform, bringing as many services and partners as possible out of the town hall and into our communities, making it a one-stop shop for residents so they can get the right support at the right level at the right time. At a family hub, you will only have to tell your story once. Services will be working together to give our residents a holistic approach, saving residents from having to repeat themselves or remember detailed case history whenever they start working with a new team or organisation. And throughout the development of our new family hubs, co-production has been at the very core of our programme. We've engaged with families, parents, partners and young people to understand what they needed and wanted from our family hubs. And we've also created the Family Voices Panel, a group that will provide ongoing feedback to ensure our hubs can adapt and change over the coming months and years to meet the needs of the local community. Across the UK, Mayor, over a decade of Tory cuts have left public services on their knees. When I speak to Children's Lead member colleagues of all parties across the country, they're tearing their hair out, focused on what, not whether, to cut from children's services. We know that Children's is the ultimate spend to save department. If we can make sure that our children and young people have the best possible start in life, if we can give them the choices and chances they need to succeed, we know that it infinitely increases their chances of growing up to be healthy, thriving adults, productive, happy citizens who grow up to have rich, interesting lives. And that is why I am so proud that despite the unprecedented financial challenges, despite spiralling inflation figures, and despite 14 years of cruel government cuts, here in Labour, Hammersmith and Fulham, we have continually invested and reinvested in our children, our young people and their families, thinking of new and innovative ways like family hubs that we can give them the very best start in life. And that is why I am proud to recommend this compassionate, innovative and ruthlessly financially efficient budget to the council.
Thank you. I'll call Councillor Alf-Sultan. Oh, sorry, I've got your name in.
Right. Mayor, tonight we've had the leader of the council eulogising all their achievements and good works and being assured that the budgets will balance and all will be well. I do question this. I know I've been assured in numerous meetings that the council has a tight fiscal policy and there'll be no more decreases in balances. Well, I still have great reservations as to the accuracy of these prophecies. I will deal with the housing revenue budget. As it's to be noted, there is only 5 million left in reserves in this account, and that's a very, very small amount, considering how much the balances have decreased and been depleted over the last few years. We have rent arrears of over 7 million for this year. I agree it's down from last year, but the only reason for this decrease is that Thames Water have finally reimbursed our tenants. Therefore, their rent accounts have gone down. It's not that we've become any more efficient and effective at dealing with arrears. We've been bailed out by Thames Water. We're also hemorrhaging money with the voids loss, which is forecast to be 2.3 million this year. This is an appalling figure. On the one hand, we know we have a shortage of accommodation. On the other, we're doing little in recommissioning the voids that we have. I don't propose to go into the ideological view regarding the sale of expensive voids, but I do question whether a more financially realistic view should be taken. We're constantly told that everything is improving, but I now turn to the disastrous Ombudsman report that's just been published. We are council that should be hanging our heads in shame for the appalling way we've treated our residents. There are no excuses. To paraphrase Oscar Wilde, to have one bad Ombudsman report may be regarded as a misfortune, but to have two is carelessness. It's concerning that despite having one appalling Ombudsman report, the lessons which should have been learned seem to be transferred to the other aspects of the housing department. Nothing seems to have been learned. I have read and reread the report, and it clearly shows that contrary to the administration's mantra that we're doing things to our residents, we're doing them to the residents, not with the residents. The level of problems have been exposed by this report includes excessive delays, poor quality repairs, lack of past work inspections, and a complete failure to learn from any previous complaints. An example which horrifies me is of leaving a disabled resident, and we are supposed to care about our disabled residents. This person was left without bathing facilities for nearly a year. This is a disgrace. It's an insult to the resident, and this shows that regretfully the council doesn't care. Because of the council's failure to run effective repair service, the council has incurred increased costs with regards both to the repairs and the additional compensation which it's had to pay out. It's right that a high level of compensation should and is being paid to our residents, but this shouldn't have been occurred. I do wonder if enough provision has been made in the balances, particularly the HRA, to cover this amount. It's with sadness that I have to say that there has been a culture of blame, that residents are blamed. It's always the residents' fault. If you say anything, oh, well, the residents should have done this. This has been shown by both the Ombudsman reports, which have shown that the council has little regard for its residents. And I regret, and I really do regret having said this at this council meeting, that on recent experiences, it's not only the housing department that is behaving in the same way. It blames the resident, not the fact that we as a council have failed. I do know, and I do pay tribute to the director for the great deal of work that is going on to trying to turn the housing department round. But I do wonder if it's possible and at what cost. I can only hope, and I really do hope, but I really have grave doubts that the housing budgets can sustain the amounts needed to turning the housing department round.
Thank you. Councillor Swan, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Before I start with the notes I prepared, I've just got to say that I'm really intrigued by this Schrodinger's manifesto, this fully costed manifesto that no one has seen, but apparently exists in concept. Unfortunately, very much like the child who goes to the teacher with the homework that has been eaten by the dog, I can't really even give it a B- because if you don't see it, I can't grade it. So I'll have to give that an S. And with regards to who's speaking tonight, I look forward to hearing from the from the deputy leader of the opposition, unless he's way too busy being the prospective parliamentary candidate for Hammersmith and Chiswick, because according to the leader of the opposition, going for other elected positions means that we can't do an effective job, which I wouldn't say is true, given the number of former councillors on the other side who've gone on to become parliamentary candidates. Anyway, the Conservative parliamentary candidate. Anyway, at the moment around the country, up and down, Mayor, it's not just us. Councillors are doing exactly what we're doing, which is assessing and voting on their budgets for next year. And I have to say, all the reports of other budget councils that I've read and seen are really, really grim. There are councillors who've been in tears. They've had to make cuts to the things that usually are first on the chopping block are parks, leisure facilities, arts and culture, green spaces, all those things that actually make living in an area an enjoyable place to be. And in Havering, they're talking about dimming streetlights, cancelling Christmas decorations and reviewing their bin collections. And I'm really pleased and proud to say that in Hammersmith and Fulham, we are not at that level, and touch wood, we never will be. The other pressure that's on local councils is to sell our public assets. Now, the leader of the opposition talked about being only able to spend things once. The problem is when you sell something like Fulham Town Hall, you can only sell it once. So, you know, things like our parks, our council estates, West Ken and Gibbs Green Estate, thankfully that we were able to claw back. But the problem is, if you cut council funding, local government funding, as the Conservative government has done since 2010, that's where the pressure comes to make it up. The problem is those short-term gains to plug those gaps don't stay plugged. So, of course, there are errors in management. I mean, ludicrous investments like Thurrock, where they spent hundreds of millions of pounds investing in solar farms to a con artist, you know, are things that we really should watch and fear. But the vast majority of councils who are struggling with funding cuts, they're actually, for the most part, things such as budgets on special educational needs and disability send, which the council leader mentioned, home to school transport, child protection costs going up through the roof, and the soaring bills for temporary housing caused by booming homelessness, really not helped by the former Conservative Prime Minister, who caused a crisis in confidence in our economy by going with billions of unfunded tax cuts, and it now seems to be on some sort of a gruesome speaking tour of right-wing conspiracy theorists. The fault with the low levels of local government funding lies at the feet of the Conservative government. There's a whole list of reports, studies and warnings which have been sounding the alarm long and loud for what's coming down the track for councils. The ratings agency Moody's in September 23 last year published a report blaming the cuts in local authority funding under the Conservatives' austerity drive since 2010 for fueling higher levels of debt, as well as a decision to scrap the Audit Commission in David Cameron's bonfire of the Quangos for a lack of external scrutiny. London councils and the local government authority, cross-party organisations, have also been making the warning. So in the midst of all this, I'm really, really proud that in Hammersmith and Fulham, we have residents who thank us for the social care services which are provided for free for their family members and neighbours, so they're able to live with dignity. Our family hubs, which ensure that children and families are able to access support where and when they need it. And things such as the law enforcement teams who are helping us and actually are answerable to us as councillors and able to actually respond to the needs of our residents. They do a very different job from the Metropolitan Police. In spite of everything and the grim picture that's happening around the country, I'm really proud that
Time's up, Councillor. Thank you.
presenting our balanced budget this
Time's up.
evening.
Thank you. Councillor to Tilbury.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Ensuring our residents in Hammersmith and Fulham get good value for money is a key priority for me, as I hope it is for all of us. My colleague, Councillor Brockenbach-Valla, has spoken eloquently and extensively about how our residents should be getting better value for money they pay in the terms of the services provided by this council. And a significant element of our council tax bill is, of course, the mayoral precept, what we pay the mayor and the GLA for. And tonight I would like to speak on this element. This mayoral precept, I note, has increased by an astounding 71% under this mayor, this year alone set to go up by 8.6%. And in some of the speeches coming from Labour tonight, we've heard a really worrying note of triumphalism from the other side. And there seems to me a bit of arrogance, even a bit of decadence on those who take votes for granted, who think that it's voters' job to blindly follow rather than their own job to serve. And if you think that's maybe histrionic, it was sad to see, as Councillor Brockenbach-Valla talked about women's safety, laughter coming from some of those backbenches. I would suggest we have a shining example of that arrogance in our Mayor of London. Now, funny, when I joined the civil service back in 2009, he was one of our departmental ministers, perfectly nice, unassuming, occasionally thoughtful kind of person. But what a transformation. The breathlessness with which every bandwagon is jumped on, the glee with which cash is spent on wheezes, the most recent of which a whopping 6.3 million on renaming 6 overlines. Nice work if you can get it. And for me, this is a sure sign of character and not a good one. The flashes of anger when anyone has the temerity to point out that there is another way of doing things, that maybe presiding over 1,000 street killings isn't a proud record, or that depriving the poorest households of mobility isn't the most equitable way to improve air quality, or that spending 700k on beach parties is perhaps a poor use of taxpayers' money at a time when every penny counts. Take it as a compliment, because they don't often come from this side, that even Hammersmith and Fulham Labour wouldn't do that. This year's mayoral budget is inspired by that self-same indulgence. In December, he denies there's any money left. In January, £500 million has mysteriously been found. Since we're massively digging into the reserves, remind you of anything? But what's that between friends? So we have another 50 million into the ULEZ scrappage scheme, otherwise known as plug their mouths with gold. We have 30 million to pay off one union in one negotiation, which has now led to other unions that had already agreed a lower deal seeking to reopen negotiations. We have a fantastic, and this is relevant, 140 million on a non-means-tested free primary school meals policy that quite literally taxes carers to give to multimillionaires. This is a good example of a policy that in many ways is noble. But is it also right that a household on 500,000 a year should be receiving this at a time when we have to make every penny count? Meanwhile, the one budget gap is for the Met Police, underfunded by some 38 million, but they did find 10 million pounds to go on courses with. Isn't that amazing? They could do personality tests to find out what the colour of their personalities is. While a fully costed plan by our mayoral candidate for investing 200 million into the Met was voted down. There's no money, apparently, but when the government recently made money available for 1,089 police officers, he failed to take them up on the offer. It must rankle a bit on these benches, you know, when you talk pretty eloquently about how you found savings in lots of places, and credit where it's due, in many places you have, to have this level of ruthless fiscal incontinence at a mayoral level. For those of us that love London, whether we've been Londoners for generations or have recently made it our home, all of this is really sad to see. A politician more about being than doing, dividing, not uniting, dictating rather than consulting, ideology rather than ideas, insults rather than service. All on the back of the money residents have no choice other than to pay. A proof point, I'm afraid, of the arrogance that comes when you take your votes for granted, and a proof point that when Labour runs something, they run it badly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call Councillor Rowan Ray.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Now, I'd like to start this evening by thanking everybody who was involved in putting this budget together. I'd like to thank Sukhvinder, James, Andre, and the whole of the finance team. I'd like to thank Danny, Kelly, Prakash, Tony, and officers from across the council and everybody who manages a budget. And I'd like to thank Councillor Cowan and my cabinet colleagues who've done such a fantastic job in managing their budgets over the year and acting in such a ruthlessly financially efficient way. As Councillor Cowan has said, this is the most challenging of times to be putting together a budget. So for them to have been able to put together a balanced budget that not only protects frontline services with no cuts to frontline services, that not only protects those extra services that we deliver here in Hammersmith and Fulham that make us unique, things like free home care, things like free breakfast for primary school children, things like our local law enforcement team that the opposition seem to want to cut. And to do all of this while finding an extra £10.7 million of investment in new services, in homeless services, in our family hubs. To have done this is a minor miracle, and everybody involved deserves our thanks. Now, I'd like to turn to some of the speeches that we've heard this evening. It's funny that at a time when the leader of the Conservative Party is doing his absolute best to distance himself from his predecessor, the Liz Truss fan club is out in full force opposite. Ignore the circumstances that we're in. Don't worry about how you're going to pay for them. Just cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes, and everything will be fine. How can you open a newspaper today? How could you look at the television? How could you listen to the radio? How could you hear what Councillor Cowan was saying about the state of local government finances and think that the solution for that is for this council to have less money? This is madness. Now, the Leader of the Opposition spoke for 42 minutes. It flew by, didn't it? 42 minutes. In this time, she called for tax. I stopped counting after 5, a number of times she called on us to cut taxes. I didn't hear her mention 1 penny of spending that she would save. Where are these tax cuts going to come from? We know what happened when Liz Truss tried this. Our fellow socialists working in the bond markets showed her that ideas weren't as popular as she thought that they were. But residents might actually like to know what they'd do if they were in power. That is, incidentally, what they stand for election for. Perhaps all of this information is in this fully costed manifesto that we heard so much about. So good that the residents aren't actually allowed to see it. But again, all we hear is tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. This shows the recklessness of the opposition and why they can't be trusted with the council's finances. Now, I've talked about our record on council tax before. Not only do we have the 3rd lowest council tax in the country here in Hammersmith and Fulham, not only have we cut or frozen council tax 5 times in the last 9 years, but our progressive council tax support scheme means that 42% of residents receive a discount, with the most vulnerable paying nothing at all. This scheme means that those least able to pay the least. Now, unfortunately, I don't have 42 minutes to address some of the corrections that I would need to make. The Leader of the Opposition said that we were taking money from reserves to pay for growth spending. This isn't true. In fact, last year we added to our reserves at a time when councils across the country are taking money out of theirs. She said that this was a favourable local government financial settlement. Well, she should tell that to Councillor Rob Humby, the leader of the Socialist Republic of Hampshire, who has said that his council's finances are in financial meltdown as a result of the actions of this government. Now, we heard interesting speeches on the HRA from Councillor Alford. Unfortunately, this isn't what we're here to debate. We heard an interesting speech about the mayoral precept and the work of the Mayor of London from Councillor Pascal Toubrey. Again, we don't control this. This isn't what we're here to talk about. Is there nobody in the opposition who has any opinions whatsoever on the revenue budget that they could share with us and the voters? Now, Councillor Sanderson gave a fantastic speech about family hubs, an innovative new policy reform that will transform the way that we deliver services in the borough, taking them out of the town hall and bringing them directly into the communities that need them most. That's why this is what we're doing as a council. We are a council that does things with people, not to them. It has been our mantra since we were elected. It has been our mantra since then, and will continue to be how we run this council and amend this budget to the council. Thank you very much.
Councillor Lloyd Harris. Councillor Lloyd Harris.
Thank you. Madam, I'm speaking against the Labour budget and inviting all councillors to reject it because, as usual, it doesn't provide an adequate and sustainable income stream to protect our most vulnerable people. I accept that we are in difficult times, and I feel we need to explore other options to provide services for our residents. Firstly, I would like to thank the Director and her team for providing a range of services that go some way to addressing the complex needs of our most vulnerable in the community. Health and adult social care in general has several difficulties that funding alone will not resolve. Staff retention, wages and training are usually high on the list. This is why I was surprised to see that the service had to find approximately 2.1 million in cuts. Seems unbelievable in this day and age. It's interesting that we can still find savings in this area. The council yet again decided to take the 2% adult social care tax rise. Is this actually going to backfill some of the services that have been cut? We need to be open and honest with residents about what is possible and what is more aspirational. We've had an ongoing fight over what appears to be semantics over the refurbishment of Charing Cross Hospital. It resulted in me making an official complaint to the Chief Executive about the Council's weekly e-newsletter. I was more than happy with the response from the investigating officer, but this was not helpful to residents nor morale staff. The health and adult social care story is not all negative. There are some positive improvements and expansion of services. We welcome the commitment to keep home care free. More work has been put into reablement, which covers a 6-week care period that will allow people to remain in their homes for longer, and also when they've been discharged from hospital. What it didn't say was, what happens if we get past this 6-week period? Do we have sufficient care home capacity and funding for some of the more complex cases to be looked after? We welcome increased reassessments on a more regular basis to ensure that residents receive the appropriate services that they need at the time. Residents need change over time, and if they are not reassessed on a regular basis, then costs will rise. A strategy to assist those with dementia is in place. I don't feel anyone could actually disagree with it. Recognition of stakeholders would encourage others to provide funding or services. The Hurlingham Club is one stakeholder. Its Community Development Department works with the council to provide activities and the use of their facilities for dementia sufferers. It's also trained 180 staff on how to work with those with dementia. In the future, the council is going to have to address how to fund these quality services that our residents deserve. This will require thinking outside the box and looking at different stakeholders to provide or co-produce some of these services. Unfortunately for residents, this administration is firmly in a box surrounded by its own propaganda. I now want to focus our minds on a more serious and disturbing note. There are no silver bullets. As I said last year, a Conservative administration would look at sharing services with other boroughs, as we have previously. There is now no fat left on the bones. There is only just many more efficiency savings, which have got to be found from somewhere, apparently. But we have to be careful because we are potentially going to be putting our residents at risk. So we must look at economies of scale to provide expanded services and skilled staff. I do actually believe that there are conversations with Westminster Council about working together on some services. We would look at other councils, including those out of London, such as Wiltshire, where the Police Crime Commissioner is looking at providing wristwatches with chips in them for those suffering from dementia. This is quite innovative, as the police are usually the first responders contacted when people are looking for their loved ones. What matters is the quality of life that we can give our elderly and vulnerable. No one wants their loved ones to suffer due to a lack of foresight. To sum up, this Labor administration is driven only by party politics, and I think some of that was seen tonight, unfortunately. It believes it has all the answers and has nothing to learn from our neighbours. As Conservatives, we are concerned only with the works that is best for our residents and the quality of services that we need to be providing to those people that are unable to necessarily provide them for themselves. So I would actually ask that you reject this and give more consideration to this particular area because it's needed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call the leader to sum up, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I follow what appears to be a series of unanimous speeches that we heard from the opposition, particularly from the former cabinet member for Hammersmith Bridge and the former cabinet member for housing, or should I say council house sell-offs, which is what started under that particular individual's rain. So what we haven't heard tonight, and I should shoot some foxes really, because otherwise they'll just have a chance to get going. There are no circumstances we're going to cut the weekly bin collections. That's a rumour. It's a mad rumour. There's no truth in it. We won't do it. And secondly, as far as the last speaker said, you know, they said we haven't funded adult social care. They haven't read the papers. They simply misunderstood it. £4.2 million this year, £26 million since we got into opposition.
Leader, can you just stop, please? Please do not heckle, do not interrupt the leader while he's speaking. I need to be able to hear. Thank you. Continue, leader.
So, as I was saying, there's actually a lot more money, 4.2 million since this year and 26 million since we got into office. But the real thing to contrast it with is the cuts of the party that the last speaker supported when they were in office. They cut adult social care year in, year out. And I heard some of those frontbench people speaking in favour of it, and many of them voted for it, and some of them are still here now. So we're not taking lessons from anybody who wears a blue rosette on adult social care, quite frankly. Read your history, read the papers and get it right. What we should have done, what we should have heard was a series of apologies tonight. I can't believe that the former cabinet member for Hammersmith Bridge said you can't trust Labour with the economy. All I would simply say is read a newspaper. Read a newspaper about what every single informed economist and business person thinks of the tenure of this government of our economy. We had no apology for Liz Truss. Presumably you supported her in her leadership bid. We had no apology, recognition of the fact that last year our budget was 132 million. This year it's 128. Do the math. It's gone down, no matter what Michael Gove has told you. We had no apology for speaking time after time in this in the council chamber about selling off council estates or introducing 575 stealth taxes, all things that two of their speakers did when they were in charge of the borough. They simply don't like a lot of people in the borough, and their policies were indicative of that. Yes, we meet developers. We just don't go for dinner with them. We just don't take drinks from them, but we meet them. And we've got £685 million in SIL and Section 106, which is a record and puts their record into shame. Just in terms of growing the economy, I like Stephen Greenhalgh, but he had a very different view of the approach to what we've had. It was about property developers. It was about building flats. Many of those flats still sit empty as they are flats for overseas investors. Since we launched our industrial strategy, and there's no one in our partners who think it was down to this lot, okay, not one person, £6 billion worth of growth. More growth than all of West London combined, more growth in the green economy than Manchester, Bristol and Birmingham combined. This is now an economic hotspot, not in property development, but in the hottest industries of the new world economy. That is being linked into the opportunities. There's not a business person I come across when I go and visit the Innovation District or talk to business forums who does not say that this administration's unique approach should be copied around the country. We have the business vote because we are on business's side, and that's what we have done throughout. So I would simply say this: it's fine for an opposition to cop. It is fine for them to do that. That's what they're meant to do. What it's not fine for them to do is to get the facts wrong, to fail to apologise for what they got wrong in office, to fail to recognise that they gave us Hammersmith Bridge. That cabinet member gave us Hammersmith Bridge with 70 years of rot. It was about to fall in the Thames, and it would have been that person's fault. And the best thing that happened to her was we won an election, which is why she's not facing corporate negligence charges. So this is the difference that Labour makes. It makes the difference in getting on top of the facts and getting on top of the details and delivering for all our residents. And I tell you, if you want another test, sometime this year will be a general election. That parliamentary candidate will lose. This one will win. And that will be the real test of what the people of this borough think about Labour and the Conservatives and our very different visions for our society and the people's lives within it. Thank you.
Thank you. I now move to the vote. As this is a vote on the budget, it is required that a roll call needs to be taken. And we don't have a divisional bell. Grant, can you please commence the roll call?
Thank you. Will councillors please indicate how they wish to vote on the recommendation?
So, sorry, Grant, I just need to say something. When you give your response, can you make sure you speak into the mic? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander.
For.
Councillor Antonides. Councillor Apthorpe. Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Schwab-Ferrier. Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cowan.
For.
Councillor Daly.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Holder.
For.
Councillor Homan.
For.
Councillor Janes.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Kwan.
For.
Councillor Lang.
For.
Councillor Melton.
For.
Councillor Miri.
For.
Councillor Nawagbe.
For.
Councillor Patel. Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Kwam.
Thank you.
For. Councillor Quigley. No voting. Councillor Reid.
For.
Councillor Richardson. Councillor Rowbottom.
For.
Councillor Sanderson.
For.
Councillor Schmidt.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Sussless.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
For.
Councillor Trey.
For.
Councillor Ume Francis.
For.
Councillor Ume Mercy.
For.
Councillor Vaughan.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Afonso.
Against.
Councillor Afzal Khan.
Against.
Councillor Alford.
Against.
Councillor Boyland.
Against.
Councillor Brockbank Fowler.
Against.
Councillor Dinsmore.
Against.
Councillor Carmel.
Against.
Councillor Lloyd Harris.
Against.
Councillor Pascu Talbert.
Against.
Councillor Stanton.
Against.
I hereby announce the outcome of the voting. For 36, against 10, not voting 1. The report and its recommendations are carried. Item 6.2, 4-year capital programme 2024 to 2028 and capital strategy 2024 to 2025. I call upon Councillor Reid to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
I've been informed that the following councillors would like to speak on this report. Councillor Francis Ume.
Thank you, Mayor. So in our 4-year capital programme, we have committed to significant investments in the major repairs and health and safety compliance for our 12,000 ageing council homes. And while we remain steadfast in our commitment to invest in and build more affordable housing, I think it's important that I take a moment to acknowledge the times where perhaps the service for our repairs for our homes has fallen short. And yes, these instances have been the subject of a recent Housing Ombudsman investigation report. We have apologised to residents adversely affected by the shortcomings in the housing repair service. We recognise the impact the service has had, and we have taken responsibility. Residents have received compensation, and we have diligently worked to rectify areas where we have fallen short. The 33 repair cases up until 2022 were the substance of the Housing Ombudsman investigation report. We have learned from these cases, and we are taking action, continuous action, to deliver services to the highest standard possible. For example, and I've spoken on this before in this chamber, we have new strong leadership and senior officers working tirelessly to improve the service, to make sure that there are effective management protocols in place to complete repairs promptly, particularly for vulnerable residents. We're investing in and expanding our contractor capacity with tighter operational management, better knowledge information management to get repairs right first time. We've also sought to procure a new contractor, which is subject to discussion at our cabinet meeting next week. This will support the delivery of good quality repairs underpinned by a compassionate service. Managing 50,000 repairs each year, we have worked to reduce all outstanding repairs, and we have brought more than 400 properties back into our housing stock for families and key workers to have a habitable home to live in. And we've also driven down damp and mold cases over the past few months by 80% with a cross-council task force encompassing public health, which acknowledges the intrinsic connection between health, well-being and housing. The recognition of the Ombudsman of the positive approach to learning and transformative changes that the service is implementing is testament to our commitment here of continued improvement, and we will continue to work with them collaboratively. We will work with residents for our forums and ensure that we're held to account through committee meetings. Our journey of improvement and investment in our housing stock is not a recent endeavour. Its roots can be traced back to the service and stock this administration inherited and has been working to fix ever since. And still tonight, no apology. We've heard about council homes that were not invested in, council homes that were put up for sale, and council homes that were not afforded a decent repairs maintenance contract. We have worked hard to right these wrongs, address these issues, and accelerate work to improve and invest, despite the extremely challenging environment that we're operating in, which includes conservative government policy to reduce rents, which actually costs the housing revenue account nearly £20 million, as well as high inflation and other challenges on workforce and supply chain issues that have been heightened by the many issues that have already been shared this evening. Look, we know the housing sector faces many different challenges, and that's all well documented, with increases in no-fault evictions, housing allowance failing to keep up with rising rents, and underfunding. Urgent action is needed to ensure a provision of adequate and affordable homes from a national perspective. And locally, over the next 4 years, we're spending more than £430 million investing in housing, part of our 12-year commitment to spend nearly £1 billion overall to maintain, improve and green our stock. We're building new homes, installing new windows, kitchens, bathrooms, and thinking about green initiatives and putting them in place to achieve our net zero ambitions. We're ensuring compliance with thousands of checks across key areas to keep our residents safe. And external auditors have given us assurance and effective standards across the 6 main compliance areas. All this investment and all these improvements will ensure the longevity and sustainability of our housing stock, providing residents with safe, comfortable, secure and modern living spaces, while also helping to enhance the overall quality of life of our vibrant communities. So if you care about residents, if you care about council homes and care that they are fit for the future, you will endorse this paper and vote in favour of it.
Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So I want to strongly endorse this capital programme part of the budget. And I wanted to start by sort of raising a point that was back at the start of the meeting, because the opposition said they weren't going to talk about the capital budget. But in fact, in the revenue budget speech, we heard a lot about the capital budget. Unfortunately, none of the content really had any facts in it that were accurate to get in the way of the arguments. So I felt it was important that I endorse this capital budget on the basis of some of the factual reality. So the first thing to say has been said, like the revenue budget, this is a remarkable capital budget that's delivering over £500 million of investment over the next 4 years, in a context that is unprecedented in my entire time involved in local government and in the fiscal environment nationally that we've heard a lot about this evening. So if we look at that capital budget within the papers, if you look what is there, and this is where we come to the facts, you will see that more than half of that is an investment in new affordable homes. The opposition earlier said and we've had this before, they came forth with some numbers which I think are just wrong, but do relate to things that you can find if you use Google, but it's a cautionary tale. So I think that the numbers that were quoted around affordable housing starts relate to the DCLG's figures around new affordable housing starts from Homes England and the GLA. The problem with this in discussion with our borough is that most of our new homes aren't in those figures. So it's unfortunate that we were unable to take some of the public questions earlier because we ran out of time, because had we got to question 11, the answer that I would have been given, which relates to our planning process, is that over the last 10 years, 1,780 affordable homes have been permitted to be built in the Derby, of which 68%, 1,200, have been social rent, as in genuinely affordable, and 32%, 574, were intermediate rent, which are also affordable homes. Contrary to the misquoted figures, we have in this capital budget a programme to build 3,000 new homes, of which we have over 17 projects. We're probably heading towards 2,000 with planning consent, as we promised in our manifesto. That is to add to the fact we have 4 or 5 schemes yet to come to planning, some of which are 100% of social rent or intermediate rent. On top of that, as the report itself states, we recently acquired another 165 homes, which will be social rent or genuinely affordable. It doesn't take you very much, if you add the maths to listen to the figures discussed above, to realise that that's a very large number of homes in a context where in the national press, as it was said, there's very little affordable house building going on in London overall. To give you some idea, that figure that was quoted for GLA starts equates to 32 houses on an average for a London borough. Last year, until July, the most social rented houses in the whole country that were built by Birmingham, and they managed 97 genuinely affordable homes. So to provide a context, this borough, and I feel quite proud to say this, is probably doing better than any other borough in the country in providing affordable housing. We have more projects in process and we have more yet to come, and we are quite likely to get very close to delivering our 3,000 affordable homes by the end of this council period. So this capital programme, if you look at the report, contains a lot of detail on that and those new affordable homes, and in fact is a remarkable achievement, and I endorse it fully in terms of the context that the rest of the country is in at the moment. And yet, as has been said, you only have to open a newspaper or listen to anybody in the national press talking about how few houses are being built overall and how even fewer affordable homes are being built anywhere in the UK. So I strongly endorse this capital budget, and I feel it's important that we correct some of the misguided reading of various figures that have been found on the internet that was cited earlier in the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Florian to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I sound like a broken record and talk about West Kensington to you, there are 2 things that I wanted to say tonight. The first is I wanted to echo the words we've heard from our leadership team about Ukraine and standing by the side of those people who have come from the Ukraine to take refuge here. And as it has been said in the opposition benches too, to congratulate all the people who have made a spare bedroom available to people who have come, as someone originating from a country that knows occupation and displacement. Thank you to them. The second thing I wanted to say was this is an important month. This is LGBT+ History Month. This is a month during which we talk and celebrate the LGBT+ history of our borough. And I wanted to congratulate and thank my colleague, Councillor Kwan, and all of the officers and all of the other councillors who have supported this initiative in organising a successful string of events in which we've heard from the lives and experiences of people who have contributed to this borough and who are members of the LGBT plus community. And this is extremely important because we are in a country today which has slid down significantly down the rating lists of LGBT plus openness and inclusivity. And particularly for trans people, I was heartbroken this month to meet someone who said to me, I'm trans and I stay out of politics for my mental health. Since the last LGBT plus month, we will have heard a Home Secretary at a party conference vilify trans people. We do not stand by this. We celebrate all members of the LGBT plus community. And Mayor, I look forward to go with you tomorrow to a meeting of what will be a meeting of three queens, which is yourself, Queen Berry Poppins, and myself, our penultimate LGBT plus event that I will invite you to at Fulham Library tomorrow. Now, this item has something very important in it, and it's the amount of money that is going to be spent on the West Kent and Gibbs Green estates. And last year I spoke to you about this already. But one thing that is really important is history, because if we forget it, it repeats itself. So I will tell the story of West Kent again. In 2008, the Tory council simply sold it. And I think we can all experience personal problems, but 11 years of people living in anguish and fear that their homes would be taken away from them, sold, and for them to go and live outside of the borough, outside of the place they've always known, really puts our little problems into perspective. And it's only thanks to the fight, decades-long fight of this group and some of the people I'm standing right next to, that we were able to repurchase the estates at no cost more than they were sold for. Now, of course, they tore down the Earl's Court Convention Centre in 2014 in very dubious conditions. But what we're debating tonight is a £1 million investment programme. That's the second time you vote for it. So thank you for having done it first. Now, please do it again tonight. But I wanted to talk to you, what does it mean for people across the West Kent and Gibbs Green estate? It means new housing on the Lily roadside. It means new windows, doors, cycle parking, retrofitting and insulation that decarbonises the estates and contributes to our net zero targets. It's new communal spaces where we can meet and work together, where we can speak to one another. And it'll improve people's daily lives, their health, their well-being and their finances to unleash their economic and personal potential, all of which have been suffering extensively under 13 years, now soon 14 years of Tory governance. And I wanted to tell you how we've done that. They say that we do things to and not at. We've had consultations, public events, market stalls, and people have been involved in choosing the colour of their carpet or the type of windows they'll get. And I'm very, very proud of this. Today, I can report that there are initiatives going across all the estates. On Ivat Place, we're decarbonising the houses. On Franklin Square, people are getting heat pumps. These are tangible, concrete things to make differences in people's lives. So this is why I urge you to support this programme once again. Thank you.
Thank you. A call on Councillor Apple, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I just check, do I have 5 minutes this time?
I've just checked.
Thank you. How incredibly exciting. Voting on the plans for Hammersmith and Fulham's £576.4 million investment plan. There is so much hope to be found within these pages. Building council housing, decarbonising the local economy, the opening of a civic campus, retrofitting, investment into children's centres, a new education campus in White City. Contained within this report are so many of the flagship and cornerstone policies of Hammersmith and Fulham Labour. While reading the report, it made me reflect on why did I decide to become a councillor? To be honest, retrospectively, I think some of the aims I had as a councillor might have displayed slight narrow-mindedness or even lack of ambition. Having worked in refuges and prisons, I am particularly interested in how the council supports residents who are facing gender-based violence or preventative crime measures. However, the council is not simply something to support other initiatives in the borough, a service which dips in and out of residents' lives. It is the bedrock of so much of the community. A landlord to 17,000 homes, a designer of our public space, a central figure in the local economy. This report fundamentally recognises this duty and position as a council. It invests in education, housing, the public realm and the environment. It recognises that as councillors, we are so lucky to have a say in how these things are shaped and designed, the foundational aspects of society that intersect every policy issue. When I speak to charities in the domestic violence sector, the fundamental issue they have is that even if they can support someone to leave a dangerous home, they aren't capable of finding them somewhere to go. They can't be a part of the process of increasing housing stock supply. They may be able to encourage better policy, or they can provide therapeutic or legal support, but they don't have access to the channels to make the public realm safer or improve our educational safeguarding. This investment plan is focused on what the purposes of a council should be. It lays out a strengthened bedrock for Hammersmith and Fulham, and it is by no means narrow-minded or lacking in ambition. A bold vision for stronger roots on which the borough can flourish. So once again, in summary, my argument is vote for the motion.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers?
Mayor, understanding order 25.3, I move the motion to extend the guillotine for 15 minutes.
Thank you.
You won't
Is that-
extend for public questions, but you will extend for your own self-congratulatory, backslapping nonsense. Like, give me a break.
Councillor Dinsmore, I didn't ask. Had there been any other speakers? I would have appreciated for you to allow me that. Thank you.
Sorry, ma'am.
Do you agree? I'm going to put it to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Yeah, the motion carried. Are there any other speakers, please? Nope. Is the report and its recommendations agreed? The recommendations are carried. 6.3. I'm sorry, Councillor Carmel, do you wish to say something?
We said no.
Right. We put it to the vote. Those for? Those against? The report and its recommendations are carried. Right, 6.3, Treasury Management Strategy Statement 2024-2025. I call upon Councillor Ree to remove the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
I've been informed that Councillor Ree and Melton would like to speak on this report.
I'll reserve my right to speak.
Okay, Councillor Melton.
Thank you, Mayor. If you'll permit me a few moments of self-congratulatory backslapping. Ruthless financial efficiency. It's an intimidating phrase. At first, this guiding light for Hammersmith and Fulham's treasury management strategy evokes images of Ebenezer Scrooge's miserly counting house or the heartless automation of Henry Ford's factory floors. But nothing could be further from the truth. Far from being heartless or miserly, under Labour leadership, Hammersmith and Fulham's council is ruthless with finances so that we may be compassionate with people. We are relentlessly efficient so that we may squeeze every penny in the pound to get the most for our residents. So while the Conservative government's 14 years of false economy austerity have ravaged and scarred public services from Land's End to John O'Groats, cutting the country's growth and prosperity off at the knees, and as the Chancellor flirts with unfunded pre-election tax cuts for his cronies in next week's budget, which that hotbed of socialist agitators at the Institute of Fiscal Studies argued were only the weak economic case for another sizable net tax cut. We have been doing the hard graft, making the tough choices to kickstart the economy right here in Hammersmith and Fulham. Our record speaks for itself, with over a fifth, as we've already heard, of UK council leaders warning that they are likely to declare municipal bankruptcy over the next 15 months, and including 2 of our fellow London boroughs that have already been forced to declare this. Hammersmith and Fulham is bucking the trend, offering more services while keeping council tax low. Our ruthless financial efficiency means that everyday local services that our residents rely upon, from free school breakfasts and free adult social care to the innovative new family hubs that we've heard of, continue uninterrupted while neighbouring councils have been forced to cut services. On borrowing, for the second year running, Hammersmith and Fulham is one of the few councils in England that has not been forced to take out additional prudential borrowing to help balance the books, insulating this council from the rapid interest rate rises that have become the norm under the Conservatives' disastrous economic mismanagement. On investment, council colleagues will know my passion for an above inflation rate of return. You'll be pleased to know that while neighbouring councils have been forced to dive deep into their emergency reserves, I'm delighted to spotlight that Hammersmith and Fulham's shrewd investments have delivered an extra 5 million through interest payments to council coffers, helping us to balance our budget and maximise funding for essential frontline services. The Green Bond, which we are so proud of, is both pioneering and unlocking a further 5 million in funding for rooftop solar and EV charge points, smart infrastructure investments of the future that will accelerate decarbonisation of our borough and reduce our residents' energy bills. Again and again and again, Hammersmith and Fulham's thoughtful and strategic approach to managing public finances is enabling us to do more with less. As I've previously observed, Hammersmith and Fulham fields one of the strongest and most innovative council finance teams in the country. I'd like to echo the thanks from both sides of the chamber to our Director of Finance, Sukhvinder Khalsi, and Director of Treasury and Pensions, Phil Triggs. They and their teams are quite simply exceptional. And as we look towards the general election, the choice of our residents will be clear between the ruthless financial efficiency and better public services of a Labour government pioneered right here in Hammersmith and Fulham, or another 5 years of chaotic, wasteful cronyism under the Tories. I think I know what I'd vote for. I commend this report.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? No. Is the report and its recommendations agreed?
No.
We need to then put it to the vote. 4. Against?
Non-voting.
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 Non-voting. Okay.
The report and its recommendations are carried. Right, recommendations are carried. 6.4, pay policy statements, 2024-2025. A call upon Councillor Reid to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
I've been informed that Councillors Reid and Quinnett and Upthorpe would like to speak on the report.
I'll reserve my right to speak.
Councillor Quinnett? Yes. Start up, can you speak into the mic, please? I can't hear you. Oh.
Can you hear me?
I can now, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to endorse our fantastic budget this evening and our pay and policy statement. In particular, the way that it is tackling the gender pay gap. Cross-country evidence suggests that in countries where women are effectively forced to choose between maintaining a career and raising children, female employment and fertility rates both tend to be lower. And by contrast to economies that help facilitate women combining work with maintaining family life, female employment rates and fertility rates are both higher. One of the main reasons why Scandinavian countries tend to be richer than Mediterranean countries is because a much higher share of their women are in paid employment. They have much smaller gender employment gap. And one of the main reasons why the Spanish economy has outperformed Italy over the past 10 to 20 years is that while Spain has made significant progress in tackling its gender employment divide, Italy has made very little progress. In other words, tackling the factors that discourage women from working, in particular, by closing the gender pay gap and improving access to affordable childcare is not only good for women, it is good for the economic growth, it is good for tax revenues, and it is good for the public services that taxes pay for. Among developed economies, the UK is middle-ranking economy on the gender employment gap. Not as bad as Italy and Japan, but far from the standards set by countries such as Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Addressing the gender pay gap to the fair advancement of women in their careers is critical for women, but it is also critical in the promotion of a vibrant economy and society. Our council recognises this. The ONS report in November 2023 states that the gender pay gap has been declining slowly over time. Over the last decade, it has fallen by approximately a quarter among both full-time employees and all employees. While it's on the decline, the disparity gender pay gap is still significant at 7.7% in April 2023. In Hammersmith and Fulham, our administration has recognised the need to address the gender pay gap for the benefit of women and broader society, and we are playing our role in trying to close that gap. Research by Mumsnet from the Parental Leave Campaign in 2019 has shown that although 84% of parents and prospective parents consider parental leave policies to be important when looking for work, 82% were concerned about asking about these in their interviews in case it jeopardised their chances of being hired. During 2024, the Council will for the first time provide external access to its family-friendly policy. This will help us to attract the best talent and allow potential employees to make informed decisions about their future. Our family-friendly policy helps to make family lives easier by including information on the number of weeks leave that they can take, qualifying periods for maternity, paternity, and adoptive leave, and much more. These practices will serve the local economy,
to facilitate families to afford to stay living in our inner cities and not have to choose between raising families and moving out of the cities and staying within our cities, because we are seeing a decline in our primary schools as well, because people are having to choose between they can't afford to stay here. What are the ways in which this borough, our administration, is making family-friendly policies available? We have shared paternal leave, unpaid parental leave where excesses are out of the allowances, allowing agile and flexible working, developing our approach for supporting parents on return to work. And as my colleague Florian has said, staff networks in place for all protected groups, women, carers, and LGBTQ plus, etc. And we have interest-free travel loans too. Scandinavians and paternal leave is
Time is up, company. Thank you.
sorry. Well, thank you very much, Mayor.
Councillor Upthorpe, you wish to speak?
Can't believe my luck.
Lucky night.
A significant amount of young people just don't see having children as an option anymore. And why would they? No hope of getting on the housing ladder, depletion of childcare services, schools literally falling down and heading towards imminent climate catastrophe with environmental skeptics in government. While previously a one-person salary could provide for a family, now families with two earners may have to rely on food banks. It is in this context that a policy change like this matters. Providing for the first time external access to our family-friendly policy means potential employees of Hammersmith and Fulham Council will be able to make informed decisions and feel assured in the knowledge that the council is a supportive employer of parents. It's a common myth that women's liberation or the invention of contraceptives is the reason behind many people having children later. While across Europe, women entering the workplace did initially lead to people having children later, as childcare facilities caught up with this change in the labour market, the average age for having children actually fell again. Only in Britain, where we continue to be unable to recognise that childcare should be economically remunerated as a public service, do we fail to support people who want to have children young. However, the publicly available policy is not the only feminist action worthy of celebrating within this pay policy statement. Also contained is its monitoring of the pay multiple and approaches that protect the interests of the lowest paid employees at the council. Feminist action in Hammersmith and Fulham once again. Because even if there are only as many women CEOs as there are CEOs called John, feminism is not predominantly about seeing women in higher positions. Indeed, there are huge and irritating misunderstandings of what the gender pay gap is. It is not fundamentally caused by women being paid less for the same job, although this doesn't continue to happen. It is technically illegal. Neither is the gender pay gap solely about the motherhood penalty.
Councillor Upthorpe. I'm sorry. Nothing personal. The guillotine has now fallen. We will take a vote on the pay policy statement. Is the report and its recommendations agreed?
No.
Yeah.
No. No.
No? Okay. I'll take a vote then. All in, for? Against? Not voting.
Yeah. Is
The report and its recommendations are carried. Item 6.5, Compensation of absence. Is
Agreed.
the report agreed?
Agreed.
No voting? Yeah? Okay, thank you. But the review of the constitution. Agreed? Good, right, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm very happy to say that this is the end of tonight's meeting. Thank you and good night.